I think we're going to see a huge reformation of the manosphere over the next couple of years, because these guys they're broken, and they've accomplished everything that the manosphere tells them they're supposed to accomplish, and there's no joy. And so they're like, what am I missing? Well, like, I know you're missing Jesus. That's what you're missing, right? And so this aesthetics and performance and physical, without the foundation of the word, without the foundation of God in your life, is empty. It's shallow and it's broken.
Hello, and welcome to the Renaissance of Men podcast. My name is Will Spencer. My guest this week is Matt Reynolds, and he's the founder and owner of Barbell Logic, an online strength coaching platform, as well as a content empire with a podcast and countless videos on YouTube. Matt has trained names you know, including Brett McKay from The Art of Manliness, and my friend and men's style coach, Tanner Guzzi. That's how I heard about Matt, so you can imagine how excited I was when I found out he wanted to come on the podcast, because Matt isn't like other strength coaches. He doesn't posture, boast, or bluster. He's a down-to-earth man who's lived his struggles and transcended them. And that gives him a refreshing authenticity in an age of fakes, frauds, cults of personality, and hucksters. You might not be surprised to learn that his transcendence has come through faith in Christ, as all true transcendence does. And so Matt has become an expert, not just in strength and barbell training, but in apologetics as well. And that's why he's the first guest of Reformation May, featuring a series of 5 guests who are influential in the Reformed faith. Matt will be setting the stage, charting the course, and showing the way for my audience to begin taking their strength and fitness battles seriously for the times that lie ahead. The beacons have been lit, men and women. Will you heed the call? In our conversation, Matt and I discussed denominationalism in the church, why Twitter isn't a real place, aesthetics versus performance improvement, delayed gratification and involuntary hardship, postmillennialism and purchasing decisions, and finally, women and barbell training. If you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. Please like this episode and share it with a friend. Plus, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we release new videos. Also, the Renaissance of Men is sponsored by Reformation Coffee, purveyors of fine beans hand-roasted in Springfield, Missouri by Pastor Brandon Lansdowne. He's creating godly prosperity for his household, community, and the kingdom, and I'm thrilled to have them as a sponsor. Head over to reformationcoffee.com and enter the code SUBFREE to get 1 free bag of coffee with your monthly subscription. And please welcome this week's guest on the podcast, the owner and founder of Barbell Logic, Matt Reynolds. Hey, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
What's up, brother? Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Me too. Thanks for agreeing to come on. And welcome. You are the first guest of Reformation May, so congratulations.
Fantastic. I'm a huge fan of both the original Reformation and the coffee.
As am I. We have a lot in common already.
That's right.
So
I've got the 5 solas actually tattooed on my right shoulder. Did you know that?
Do you really?
Yeah, I really do. Look.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Really
well, okay. Well, I was going to say that I listened to your podcast with Eric Kahn, the Hard Men podcast.
Yeah, sure.
And I wanted to talk to you about some of the things that you said about fitness, which were some of the clearest articulations of fitness principles that I'd heard. But since you just showed me the 5 solas tattoo on your arm, I think I might want to start there, because there's been something that's been on my heart today, and maybe you can relate to this. And now I was sort of found at Burning Man by a group of charismatics, right, who were having a ministry at Burning Man. I attend Apologia, which is a Reformed Baptist church. Yes. I went to a Jesuit high school, and so I look at all these different denominations, and I'm like, cool, like everyone has all these kind of different ways to God in their own way, and I'm not going to be the guy to litigate that. But I see a lot of attacks on Protestantism from Catholics and Eastern Orthodox bros all the time on Twitter and social media. Sure. And so that's been on my heart. And so you show that, and I'm like, well, can we start by talking about that a little bit, and then we'll work our way to fitness and some other issues.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, here's the thing. I like having fun with my Catholic bros and my Eastern Orthodox bros. I really do.
Yeah.
I think when we're able to do that, I mean, here's the deal. There are things about Catholics and Eastern Orthodox that I really respect. They are tremendously focused on the family, on Christendom, on like, so there's these things that I think that we can come together on, and then that allows us to open up the conversation to have the hard conversation, which is like, oh, hey, by the way, salvation isn't isn't a works-based thing. And so I one of my favorite clients that I've coached for 7 or 8 years, we call him the Jacked Priest, hashtag the Jacked Priest, Father John Floater. He's a Catholic priest up in Minnesota. He's a great guy. I've gone up and stayed with him. I'd never been to mass before. I actually went to a mass. And listen, to be clear, I've got the 5 solas tattooed on. I am not pro-Catholicism at all. I'm as reformed as it possibly gets. However, I think it's important to be able to have these conversations with each other and not throw each other under the bus from the very beginning. And you've seen this a lot with like the Christian nationalism movement and things like this on Twitter, that we're having a lot of infighting here. And I want to be careful, because I don't know that Eastern Orthodox and Catholic are infighting, right? Like I don't know that they're part of the in. I don't know, right? But I do want to have the good conversation with them. And so what I found is that when we have conversations that throw rocks at each other, when we throw each other under the bus, like it leads to nowhere. Like nobody changes. And I see this a lot on Twitter. I see people making posts, Theo bros, or even guys in my own Reformed community who will often make these sort of like factual, inflammatory posts. Or it's like this is the thing, right? Like whatever it is, it's a pro patriarchy thing, or women shouldn't be in the army. Period. Boom. Post. And
Hot take.
Okay, I agree with those things. But to me, it's important to actually communicate the why behind the thing that you're saying. And when we're able to do that, we're able to have a conversation. So yes, I have seen my pastor, Brandon Lansdowne, who runs Reformation Coffee and is the pastor at Corndale Reformed Baptist Church that we go to. He is,
shout out, Brandon.
the Catholics, the trad Catholic bros have just crushed him this week. And they're not very nice about it. And so, but I think the reality is that we want to have the conversation. So we, like, for example, we have a group of guys in our church and surrounding churches, kind of our community. We meet every Friday night at one of the guys' house, and we drink beer, whiskey, smoke pipes, and just talk about culture and theology and politics and whatnot. And one of our closest friends is like diehard Eastern Orthodox, and he's there every week. We invite him because he's part of our family, he's part of our crew. And so I want to have those conversations with those guys. I think the most important thing to draw out here is that the conversation it's imperative that we have the conversation. And if what we do is we throw them under the bus from the very beginning, we don't ever get to have the conversation. And so, yes, we have to stand up for what's right. We have to stand up for truth every single time, no matter what. We're called to speak the truth, but we're called to speak the truth in love.
Yes.
Not to throw the rocks. And so I think that if we're able to do that and do it well, look, nobody wants to be reproved, right? Nobody wants to be corrected. And so we have a natural defense mechanism there. When someone says like, hey, I see this thing in your life that I don't like, your natural defense mechanism is like, whoa, 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 who are you to speak about these things? But when we're able to do that with our friends and our brothers in love, then we're able to have the conversation. By the way, it's what I'm called to do as a parent. It's what I'm called to do with my daughters. I don't want to provoke my kids to wrath, to anger. That's the point. So that I can have this conversation. And I've got a 18-year-old and a 13-year-old, both daughters. My 18-year-old, we have an incredible relationship, and she has said numerous times that she really appreciates the fact that I have never said, do the thing because I'm the emperor, because I said so, because of what,
right.
Like there's always the why behind the thing. And then I'm also sort of, I want to be careful because I don't want to make this sound like sort of arrogant. I also don't have any problem of apologizing or stating when I'm wrong. And so I think we'll get into this, I'm sure, a lot today, but man, I've lived a tough life, lots of sin, things in my past that I'm absolutely not proud of. But because of those things, I don't really have an ego there. And so when I make a mistake as a dad or as a husband or as a church member or whatever, it just it doesn't bother me, to come forward and be like, hey, I screwed this up royally. Like, I got to pull my head out of my hind end, and this is the thing I did. And I think when we're able to do that, that leads to be able to have an actual great conversation, where the goal of the conversation is to really change the mind or to elicit change in the person you're talking to. So whether that's a Catholic or an Eastern Orthodox or your kids or whatever, like, if we come at it so tough and so forced and so hard and so like, then we don't ever get to have that conversation. And so what I end up seeing is I see this all the time on Twitter, where these guys make these like inflammatory posts, which are correct. Like, I read everything that they write and I'm like, yep, I totally agree with what they're saying. But I often wonder, like, what's the point? Because what we end up doing is we just further polarize each other. And you get the cheerleaders who are like, yeah, you're right. This is, pro patriarchy, whatever. And you get the other side that's like, patriarchy is terrible and it's evil. And it's like, well, aren't what we're really trying to do is elicit change? And so I think that it takes some amount of wisdom there to approach the conversation well, so that we get to have the conversation at all.
I agree completely. And
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's difficult is that I'm as reformed as you are, and I thought through these issues for myself, and I
Sure.
hold the belief that with very important issues like fundamental divides, whether it be left versus right, patriarchy versus egalitarianism,
Yep.
whatever, Catholic versus Protestant, whatever, I have thought for a long time that you can't actually properly have that argument with somebody unless you are prepared to articulate the opposing position as well or better than your own.
Sure.
Right? So it's like, so I've put myself into a lot of these opposite mindsets. Like, for example, I used to be super liberal and progressive. I was part of Occupy Wall Street in San Francisco for a year. By the way,
do you know that I was in Manhattan the day that started?
Oh, wow.
I was actually in Manhattan on business. I think it was the first time I was ever in Manhattan in my life. And I was down on Wall Street, and these people came, and I was like, who are these crazy hippie people with all the signs? It was day one of Occupy Wall Street. And I actually saw it.
Wow.
I got video on my cell phone. It's super weird, right?
You should post that, because that was
actually, so was you.
That was not, no, I was in San Francisco. I know,
but you were part of the movement.
Yeah, I was. And so I was inside that, and now I couldn't be further on the other side. But I understand as much as it's possible to understand the mindset and can argue against it from within. These are the logical inconsistencies. Now, I don't mean to compare Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy to Occupy Wall Street. That's not my intention.
Sure.
But my intention is to say, it seems that in all the significant debates of our day, we're yelling at each other from our own particular perspective, as opposed to trying to get within the perspective of the person sitting across from us, to try and understand them and to try and bridge that gap. And I think that's the thing that I find so difficult, is you have a whole lot of well-meaning men and women who are trying to move forward on a Christian basis to rebuild society. And of course, this also ties in to the Christian nationalism debate that's been happening. And you just go onto social media, and it's like, why are the adults fighting? Why is everybody yelling? And I guess to some extent, Twitter doesn't allow you to get within the mindset of another person, because we're all trying to score points with the audience.
Sure.
But I think it's imperative that we begin having that conversation in such a way, it's like, what does this person believe and why? And how can I understand from within their own mindset, so we can have, like you said, a real conversation? And I don't see that happening with this fundamental historical divide. Now, it's Reformation May, and we dive right into the Protestant Reformation. Rock and roll did not see this coming, but I appreciate it. And I guess the thing that burns my heart about this is that we're not going to work this out on Twitter, guys. That's not where this is going to happen. Councils and burning at the stake and executions and arguments and letters and tracts and books and libraries. We're not going to sort it out with 280 characters at a time on Twitter. And so I guess I'm just hoping for better from my brother sometimes, but sometimes
it's those Friday night conversations that we have around the campfire with my brothers. That's where we get to work it out. And so, it's easy to forget that Twitter's not really a real place, right? There's real people there.
That's right.
And but the reality is like, you can't build a relationship, not for real, in a place like Twitter. And so Twitter's a place, it's the town hall. It's the place where you get to post the 95 Theses on the wall. Like
Yeah.
that's where it would have been done if it were today. And so those things get to be done there, but you don't really get to really kindle a relationship. And those things are done around good food and good drink and in a house and in person. And that's where I think real change comes in, is you're able to talk through those things. And it's funny that the guy that is a Eastern Orthodox friend of ours, he comes from the Reformed background, so he knows everything that we believe. He was, as a matter of fact, I met this guy. Who was buying a John Owen book, The Death of Death and the Death of Christ. That was the first, when I met this guy, that's the book he was buying. Now he's Eastern Orthodox.
Wow.
So I can't teach him a lot about what we believe because he knows. And so we spend a lot of time asking him questions about Eastern Orthodox because I want to learn, for the very reason that you've said. I want to understand. Obviously, nobody comes to the table thinking that they're wrong or they're evil. They think they're right. Like this guy genuinely thinks he's right. And so you're exactly right. I have to understand, why does he think he's right? And what is the thing that changed his mind? And so it's important for me. And it's also very important to me to be really solid in my faith to be able to go into that, because obviously there's something that occurred with him that changed his faith along the way. And so I think this is why it's so important that we're steeped in scripture and the gospel and understanding what we are getting into, so that we can talk to these people and have this tremendous conversation to, in effect, elicit change. We know that God's word doesn't return void. And so every time that I'm able to speak that truth into him, I certainly hope and pray that God is softening his heart. But I also understand that God could be hardening, right? And so that's God's job, not mine. And so I preach and promote the gospel and the word of God, and I'll let God do what he does after that. I'm just called to share the good news.
Amen. I agree. I've experienced the same, and I love my Eastern Orthodox bros, some of which I talk to very often, and to feel the hardness of heart when they begin attacking Protestants, and it's like, guys, like, maybe you don't mean that to be me, but that includes me. And not only does it include me, it includes Pastor Doug Wilson, Jeff Durbin, Charles Spurgeon, Bonhoeffer, like, you pick. And it's like, are you going to really tear down generations of good and godly men? And that's the part that's difficult, is like, is there room in your heart? And this is true for all men and women too. Is there room in your heart for someone who on the surface might seem different from you in some important way, but at the core there's something very important that you have in common? Now, that you can take this principle too far, you can give truly wicked people too much of a line of credit. And I think probably we're all guilty of that at some point in our lives. Certainly our society would be, and we'll get into that. But there's a point at which the hard edge becomes so counterproductive in advocating for your own belief that you actually drive away potential allies. And where do we, like, how do we as men, and maybe to take the conversation into a broader perspective, how do we know when advocating for the hard edge that gives us our productive edge as men actually becomes something cutting to potential allies? Because I see this happening a lot. The Christian nationalism debate, for example, is a great example. It's a great example of this that's been going on for the past week or two. It's like all these men that are engaged in this debate are hugely insightful, incisive men that I respect greatly. Their minds, their intellects, their resumes, their accomplishments, their books, all of these things I respect greatly. And they've turned these edges on each other. And like, okay, so there's a point at which, like, yeah, let's all take shots at each other. But it's like, guys, it's been a few days now. Can we back off this a little bit? So how do we know as men when we cross that? That threshold?
I mean, it's really public. I mean, this is my other issue with something like Twitter, is like, it's, having that same conversation. I think that same conversation occurred among some of these guys that also I very much respect. If they just called up each other on the phone, this would be taken care of instantly. I mean, within 5 minutes, the thing would be taken care of. But because it's posted on Twitter, it's posted on social media in this place that doesn't really exist, then it just pours fuel on the fire. And so, look, certainly we have to stand up for what's right, period. And I want to be clear about that forever, that we never stand for something that's not true. So we stand for truth, but there is a way to do that in love, and there's a way to do that with some charity. There's a way to do that with thinking the best of other people. And so, and again, I would just argue that, like, when you stand up for truth, what is the purpose of standing up for truth? Was it just to make a statement, to like plant the flag? You know, there are times when we do that. We're like, no, this is ridiculous. I'm planting my flag here. But most of the time that we're standing up for truth, the goal is to actually change the mind or change the heart of other people. And so if we're not able to do that in love, then we got a real problem. It wasn't efficacious. It didn't bring about the effect that we wanted. And so I think that's why it's so important to be able to do that with some wisdom. And that's hard. It's really hard today in our super polarized world, you know, as polarized as we are politically and culturally, and it's a mess. And but you know, so the last church I went to, the same church that Brandon, my pastor now, was a pastor of, he was one of the pastors there. I was in a life group, you know, a small group that we led, and I'm in my mid 40s, my wife and I, and we've been married almost 25 years. And we were really like parents to the other people in the life group. That they were mostly millennials and some Gen Zers. And man, they were pretty liberal, I would say. Pretty liberal. Not super woke, but like sort of pacifists. They weren't pro 2A. They were, you know, they were, I don't really know what I think about whatever, these sort of social issues. And we were able to have really great conversations with them because we didn't throw them under the bus, because we understood, like, there was a time when we were 22 and we didn't really have it all figured out. Not that we have it all figured out now, but we also were sort of questioning, you know, where we stood politically or whatever the thing was. And so I think as soon as you pronounce that someone is an idiot, or that they're, you know, that they have low IQ. Oh, my dog went nuts. Sorry. I got a new puppy in the house. Hey, Milo.
It's all right.
Sorry about that. This is actually the story of the puppy. It was my pastors had a elderly lady live next door. She fell and broke her back 2 weeks ago. And they had this cute little Boston Terrier, and she had this cute little Boston Terrier. So what are we going to do with this Boston Terrier? We're like, we'll babysit it for a week or two. And then she was like, I want him to take the puppy. So I inherited this dog. She's in rehab. I think she's doing okay. But yeah, so it was tough. So he's still learning, and he's looking at the front door, barking at other dogs go by. Anyway, it's a tough conversation to have. It's one that I think that I don't care how good you are at it. It's one you're going to make mistakes on. But we have to continue to try to speak the truth in love. And I think it almost sounds like I'm oversimplifying things, but that's it. That's what we're called to do. We speak the truth always, every single time, no matter what, in love, every single time, no matter what. If we do those two things, if we do that well together, then we get to have the right conversation that allows potentially the gospel to change people's heart and mind, which is what we want.
Can I play devil's advocate for a second?
Sure.
Because obviously I agree, and I've seen the power of speaking truth in love in my own life, and that's something that I've been learning to get better at, because I can be quite hard-edged in my own ways.
Sure.
And I know, and we're called to do that. However, I think a lot of men are raising the question, like, at what point do we actually, like, maybe we need to expand the definition of what it means to speak in love, because
Sure.
where does speaking in love, which I think we hear in English, because there's only one word for love, it means all 4 different things. We hear the word love and we mean something perhaps soft.
Yep.
I don't want to say, maybe emotive, maybe feminine, though not necessarily effeminate. There's a softness to it. But there's also a way in which we have to learn to speak the truth in love with a hardness to it.
Absolutely.
That no is a loving word. And so how can we as men learn to speak the truth in love, and have that in love, speaking that truth in love, have a firmness to it, right? An unyieldingness to it. Like, where does that come in?
It has to come in, right? And I think this is where we have to be, we have to use wisdom, and we have to listen to the Holy Spirit, and we have to use the model that we were given in Scripture to be able to do this. Jesus wasn't always soft, that's for sure. I mean, at some point he's flipping over tables, right? So and so there are times we have to go to people and say, bro, look at this thing. Like, this is a problem. And that's okay, right? That is the best way. look, if I had a friend who was cheating on their wife, like, I'm not going to be soft about it. I'm going to go, Will, dude, what are you? You're throwing your life away, man. That is truth and love. That is like, and you can say like, dude, I'm telling you because I love you, because nobody else will tell you this. You got to pull your head out of your hind end. Like, you're throwing your life away. And by the way, I think it's often really important to be able to, if there's times that you can be honest about your own previous sins. I have these things in my life. We can get into these. There was a time 10 years ago I had affairs on my wife. I've been pretty open about this stuff. God has completely reconciled our marriage. It's an amazing marriage. But that actually gives absolutely. I was such an amazing wife. But that's opened up the opportunity for me to actually speak that truth in a harsh reality, because like I say, I was there. Like, dude, I know what it feels like to throw your life away with this stuff. You are chasing this thing that is fleeting happiness for a day that will bring about no joy whatsoever. As a matter of fact, it's going to bring about death. And so, I think that that's the way we're able to do that. So for me, speaking truth and love, even when it has to be harsh, even when it has to be hard, I think it's important to not come across as the self-righteous elder brother, right? To be very honest and very truthful with the friend or family member or whoever you're speaking to that's in sin. And I think it's often very important and usually valued and respected to talk about, like, this is how a sin similar to this or this same sin actually affected my life in such a negative way. Like, that's why I'm able to speak about this. And so, you don't have to make up. I've never been addicted to black tar heroin, so I can't. If I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, hey, this is. But I've been addicted to stuff, and so I think to be able to sympathize on some level, like, hey, it's not trying to sympathize with the fact that they're sinning. It's to say, I know what it was like to be here, and I know how much death it brought. I know how much destruction it brought me, and I see this in your life. And so, but again, these are conversations that you have with real people who you've developed real relationships with, not on Twitter. And I still question when someone, like, I actually don't know. If you ask me this question, I'll just be honest. I don't know what we do about calling out sin on Twitter, because I don't know how much, like, okay, we're going to castrate kids. Like, okay, I'm going to stand up against that. Right. But the reality is I don't have any relationships with those people. And so I don't know how much change. So there's a time when I feel like, okay, there are times when I need to, like, plant my flag and say, this is wrong and this is right. And I'm going to stand up for truth. But ultimately, what I'm really trying to do when I'm calling something out, when I'm calling out sin, I'm trying to reprove someone. I'm trying to correct. It's someone that I actually have a relationship with. It's my kids. It's my wife. Somebody in my church. Somebody in my community. It's one of my employees. It's like, and that's who I'm called to correct. I'm not, again, we've talked about this before. Like, I am under the authority of my pastor, Brandon Lansdowne, in my church. I'm not under the authority of all pastors. Joel Osteen's not my pastor. He's not going to give an account for my soul, right? And so, at what level do I actually need to get up and spew that what Joel Osteen's doing is prosperity gospel crap? Well, it is prosperity gospel crap, but I don't know, So I'm honestly asking the question. I don't know. Twitter bothers me with some of those things where I'm like, I try to have great conversations with people that I generally know, things that are edifying, things that are encouraging, but, like, I don't know where our role is there to call out other people that we don't even know when we hear about a sin that they're committing. I don't know. That's certainly not addressed in the Bible. There wasn't a time when it's like, oh, you can just get on and type 180 characters and, like, let people, I don't know. So it's tough. So what I know is that we're called to have those talks with people we're in relationship with, that we are doing life together with. And I think we're called as men to have a bunch of those great relationships. I have great relationships with other men in my church. And there was a time when I didn't. There was actually a time when I thought, I don't really need guy friends. Like, my wife is my best friend, and I've got my family, and I've got employees and stuff, but, like, in general, I don't need. And then I realized, like, I do need that. I do need that. I need other men to pour into me. I need to be able to pour into them. And so those are the guys that I'm able to elicit change in, and vice versa, them for me, on a daily basis. And so we meet each other for breakfast. We we meet for discipleship at lunch. We go after work to the brewery. We do, and those are the conversations. I'm not worried about the conversation on Twitter. I'm not worried about changing somebody's life there. Somebody trying to change my life there. It's that these are the real relationships that matter. So yeah, man, sometimes, you have these really kind conversations that like is sort of the soft, feminine truth and love sort of thing. And then sometimes you have those conversations that are really hard and you say, man, you're screwing this all up. And I think both are in love for sure.
I think with regard to Twitter, I mean, there's so much that we could choose to be outraged about every single day. Like how many different absolutely terrible things are going on that are truly morally reprehensible, socially reprehensible, theological, all those. Like I could be outraged about 1,000 different things all day. And I think it is a trap, because as soon as you start getting outraged about X, then you have to get outraged about Y, and then Z, and then you're trapped in the outrage washing machine, just tumbling over and over again for days, and the dopamine and all that stuff. And
people accuse you. They'll say, "Well, how come you got outraged about this thing, but you're not outraged about this thing?" And now you're like,
exactly.
Okay, so now I'll just be outraged about all the things.
Right. That's right. I mean, that's literally what I was just about to say. You read my mind. Like that's the thing. It's like, oh, you're outraged. So why aren't you outraged about this? It's like, well, that's why I try really hard. And I think I'm doing a pretty good job not being outraged about anything on social media. I just don't. I don't give into that. If I see the entire herd moving with a subject, let's all talk about Tucker. It's like, no, let's all talk about this thing. No, in fact, what I tend to say is like, everyone, like, calm down. The outrage is what they're looking for. Right?
That's right.
Now,
that's right.
And if I'm more willing to get outraged about things happening in the public sphere than I am willing to get, I guess, appropriately outraged about the things that I'm doing wrong in my own life, in my own relationships, there's a problem there, because I'm channeling that energy inappropriately. If I'm spewing all this invective towards some political figure or whatever, or some social figure I don't like, that's energy that's being wasted that I could use to fix my life. And I think that's the trap.
For sure. Yeah, I learned I went to Fight Laugh Feast this past year with the Cross Politic guys, and it was great, actually. I was on the Cross Politic podcast. They had me on there, and of course they're our Presbyterian brothers, and I'm a Reformed Baptist. And as a matter of fact, it was right after the tranny thing came out. If you were paying attention to that, they come out on their podcast and they said Baptists drove sort of the culture for building trannies. And what they meant was, I understand, big evangelical Baptists, and that's fine, but they didn't differentiate and say like, well, hold on, we got a whole bunch of like really, really good Reformed Baptist brothers. Anyway, so I was on the podcast. We went there; it was great.
Church,
That's right. And so, as a matter of fact, James White actually came on and debated them about that.
I remember that.
So he did great. It's one of those things where it's like I did learn that. I was actually concerned about this when I went to Fight Laugh Feast. So they invited me out as a guest. They treated me great. I got to go to all the special. I got to hang out with Doug Wilson, eat lunch with him, sit at the same table, and all this. It was great. But I went in and I was kind of like, are we fighting for to be on the sort of edge of the inflammatory response? Like, what is the thing that's, we're going to try to like catch fire with whatever the thing is today. And I did learn a good lesson when I went out there. They did they impressed me with their perspective that we are called as brothers to refine each other, iron sharpens iron, to fight in a good manner, to fight in love, and to laugh together and to feast together. Like, that's the point of the thing, is like we have great conversations and hard conversations, and we argue about things and so I do see it from that perspective. I do understand that it's there. As a matter of fact, it did sort of change my feeling about some of that. But at the same light, when you go back and think about like the conversations that we've seen this past week, these guys that we all love and respect, fighting over something like Christian nationalism. Like, what's the definition of Christian nationalism? That's really the source of the argument. Like, what is it? Is that like a white nationalism thing? Is it rooted in racism, or is it like, we want Christian families and Christian churches and Christian schools and Christian nations? Like, that's, and so this is kind of like the two sides of the things. And there's a part of me that wants to go like, hey guys, we're killing millions of babies. Can we just get on? Can we just, like, we can agree with that, right? By the way, we can agree with that with our Catholic and Eastern Orthodox brothers too. We're castrating children. Like, do we understand? Do you understand what we're arguing? Are we really arguing about the definition of Christian nationalism?
Right.
Like, that's the point, right? Is that it's like, and so, yes, I do understand we have to have hard conversations with our Catholic and Eastern Orthodox brothers, and sometimes with our Presbyterian brothers. Like, those are good conversations that are in the household that we can have. But I think it's really, really important for us to come together and go, like, do we understand what's really important? What's really important is a complete and utter disaster that's going on in our country right now, which is killing millions and millions and millions of babies every single year, and castrating children and LGBTQ plus. Oh man, the plus scares me. I don't know about you. The plus is the scary one, because that's the pedophiles. And so, anyway, so I think we'd be well served to be able to understand where the gravity really sits in these arguments and go, like, I don't know that the definition of Christian nationalism really matters.
Right. I appreciated what Vodi Bakum said about that. It's like, well, when people ask me, these are me paraphrasing his words. When people ask him, what are you a Christian nationalist? He's like, well, it depends on what the definition is, right? So maybe we need to land on a definition, and that's why I love going to the church that I go to. Apologia with Jeff Durbin and James White. In fact, one of the elders, I think it was Pastor Zach, said in services maybe a month or so ago, he said Apologia does 3,000 hours of evangelism per year. And I was out there, and including at abortion mills and the Mormon temple, and and on Mill Avenue, the college town in Arizona State, Islamic temples, debate, all that stuff. And I was part of the evangelism team that went out to the Super Bowl. And for those listening, we didn't go into the Super Bowl. Some people said, where do they get all the money to pay for those tickets? We did not go into the Super Bowl. We were outside the Super Bowl. We were outside, actually, Guy Fieri's Flavortown. So I've done evangelism at Flavortown, right? So, but to get to be out there to actually do that, and it's like, can we meet? You don't necessarily have to do that much evangelism, but can we meet there? Can we meet at the line between Christ and the world? Can we meet at the line between saved and sinners, right? Can we meet there instead of in the back room arguing about 500-year-old or older theological topics that the wisest men of their days could not work out in person? We're not going to work this out, and we're not going to work this out in public on Twitter, right? Like, maybe we'll work it out together, coming to an agreement that there are some things that we just can't reconcile. But the one thing that we can agree on is that we live in a fallen world. I love what C.S. Lewis says. We are an invasion. We're an infiltration of a fallen world, trying to bring sinners into reconciliation with God. Can we meet there instead of bashing on each other theologically? I see it as counterproductive. But I mean, again, I guess we are all sinful men, and we don't have the ability to fight it out with fists anymore. So we fight it out with words. And that's an improvement, but it also can be really counterproductive many times.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, it's good.
So I want to talk about, I want to ask you about the tattoo, because you have the five souls tattooed on your arm. And so what's the story behind that tattoo? I guess it must signify something that what your faith did for you at some time in your life. Like, what motivated you to get that tattoo? There it is, right there. I didn't even ask you about it.
No, it's a great question. So I am in my mid 40s. I probably, if I could go back and do it again, I probably would not get any tattoos. This is your typical thing that our generation did when we got in our early 20s. My first tattoo is, I actually have Atlas over here. So it's when I won my pro card in strongman, and certainly I was not really secure in my faith at the time, but I got a tattoo of Atlas, and then in the aftermath, in 2008, 2009, in the aftermath of the affairs and the struggle, and God really reconciling me back to Himself and to my wife, I was in search of any depth of gospel that I wasn't getting at the church I was going to at the time. So it was just, I was going to a typical, seeker sensitive, sort of shallow, big evangelical type church. And and they offered me nothing in the midst of I had tried to destroy my life with infidelity, and it was really, really hard. And so I got online and I started researching everything I could to find great pastors that teach doctrine, like theological giants. Like I was searching whatever, and I discovered guys like Matt Chandler and Mark Driscoll and Tim Keller and John Piper, and guys that I would not agree with today, guys that I certainly wouldn't be as high on now as I was then. But at the time, it was such a, I mean, this is 11, 12 years ago. It was such a breath of fresh air to discover that. And so all of those guys were Calvinists. They weren't all Reformed. They called them the Young, Restless, and Reformed at the time, right? So, and I say that because, I mean, they just weren't, they weren't confessional. They weren't Westminster 1689 or anything. So they were certainly Calvinists. And so I started going down that path of like, and I really struggled with Calvinism for a couple years. I mean, like I really struggled with it, especially like limited atonement and some of those things. And so certainly I could grasp like the depravity of man, of course, like when you're coming out of like the situation I had just come out of, like, absolutely, we're all depraved. I got it. And you realize over time that all five of those really rise and fall on each other. And so if one is true, they all end up having to be true. And so over time, I very begrudgingly, reluctantly became a Calvinist. And then once you do, and then I don't know that I ever had a really intense cage stage as an early Calvinist. I remember getting it. I'm a Southern Baptist preacher's kid. My dad was a Baptist preacher and wonderful father. I lost him a little over a year ago now to Lewy body dementia, pretty young in his early 60s. But he was not Calvinist, and so we had some really intense discussions in those days. But I think the tattoo signifies the fact that it was like there was a reawakening for me of the gospel when I discovered the depths of how good it is. And so until you really desperate, I had lived most of my early life as a self-righteous older brother. I was the Baptist preacher's kid that didn't party, didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't cuss, didn't have sex, didn't do drugs, all those things. And then I went through this period of my life when I was the prodigal and cheated on my wife and did these terrible things. And when you actually need the gospel, when you actually need forgiveness, when you beg for forgiveness, the weight of that finally hit me. And so I was certainly, I don't hold Calvinism anything above the gospel whatsoever, but I think the five solas for me, these are the things that really matter. These are the, that Scripture matters, faith alone, grace alone, Scripture alone, Christ alone, glory to God alone.
Yeah.
Like you realize, like, oh, we've made it so much more than that. We've added all these man-made rules and all these things, and like there was actually this return back to these are the things that matter. And so it was a big deal to me. And I also I graduated with a double major in history and religious studies. I really enjoyed learning about the Reformation in college, and so even before, which is funny, when I was getting my undergrad, I wasn't Reformed, I wasn't a Calvinist then, but I was just really interested in learning about that stuff. And so learning about Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and those guys. And so when it ended up becoming a real important part of my life, I decided to go get the tattoo. So it's cool. I'm glad I've got it, but I don't know. As a 45-year-old CEO of a multi-million-dollar business, I probably wouldn't. Like, you can see it popping out of my sleeve everywhere, So I'm like, unless I wear long sleeves, if I'm at a business meeting, I got to wear long sleeves and roll the sleeves up, and so it's fine. So so that's the story.
Yeah, I've got my arms are covered in pagan symbols. I'm actually going to visit a friend of mine in Carson City, Nevada, in June. And he recently opened a tattoo shop, so he said he would start covering some of these up for free.
Nice.
So I can't untattoo myself. All I can do is just dedicate them to Christ. So
That's
actually,
right.
I want to talk to you about this background in you said it was a history and theology. Is that what you said?
Yeah, history and religious studies. Yeah.
history and religious studies. That's not what someone would expect from the guy who runs a barbell strength training kind of company.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that makes you, is that you put these things together. So I don't know if you want to share some of the things that you most appreciated learning about the Reformation, because church history is new for me. I went from the New Age, basically blew through, my friends who I met at Burning Man, who were charismatics, blew through there and went right into Apologia, straight into 6-point Calvinism, Reformed Baptist. And it was probably the fastest theological turnaround in history.
That's right.
And I love it, but I haven't yet dug into to the history of the Reformation quite yet. I haven't gotten there yet. So I'd be fascinated to hear anything that you have to share that was important to you about these things you learned.
Sure. I mean, so it was kind of interesting. I'm a bit of a Renaissance man with this, which is probably right for this podcast, I guess. That I've studied a lot of different things, and I wanted to be an architect my whole life growing up as a little kid. My dad was a civil engineer and a pastor, but had graduated as a civil engineer before he got saved. And I wanted to be an architect. I went to school to be an architect. Was actually the youngest architect intern in the state of Missouri. I had to take what is their version of the bar exam to do that. I passed it and thought that was the direction I was going to go. The architect firm really blew up while I was there, and it grew like crazy. But I watched in the time period that these guys, and I was like 17, 18, 19, 20 years old in that ballpark, got engaged to my now wife. And I watched these guys that got divorced. Their kids hated them. They worked 80 hours a week. And I was like, oh, this is not what I want to do. It's actually hilarious to tell this story now as a CEO of a company where I work way too much anyway. And so, but at the time I was like, I don't think I want to work 80 hours a week and be an architect and do this thing. And so my wife was going to school to be a teacher, be a kindergarten teacher. And I thought, well, that'll be okay. We'll both be public school teachers. This will be great. And so I went to school for history, and I loved religious studies, and had enough hours to get the minor. And I was like, well, how many more hours to get the major? And so ended up doing that as well. And I loved history, and I loved church history, and I loved the the Arab-Israeli conflict. That was super interesting too, as I should have a minor in that. And so it's just, I don't know, I just studied the stuff that was interesting. And so, I mean, listen, the Reformation is wild because you get this, you're coming out of the Dark Ages. I mean, where nothing progresses for hundreds of years. And then you get the Renaissance and the Reformation kind of back to back. And, you've got Martin Luther, who didn't want, he literally wanted to reform the Catholic Church. It didn't really reform that. It's funny, we call it the Reformation.
Yeah.
It was it was a complete destruction of, it was, and you get Protestantism. And so, but the guy actually wanted to be a Catholic priest. He was a Catholic priest. And he saw these problems. He saw these problems in the Catholic Church of things like indulgences, where you're like, oh, I'm going to go cheat on my wife next week. And what kind of money do I need to pay to go ahead and get pre-forgiveness for this thing? And he was like, that is a problem. And it was a problem. And Catholics to this day would say it is a problem. And so, he just dove into Romans, which is my favorite book of the Bible. It's just beautiful theological dissertation. It's it's Paul's systematic theology is what it is. And so you get to read, it literally is just this sort of perfect, logical, pragmatic, and I mean that in a positive way, of this is the presentation of the gospel. And of course he's, Luther spends the rest of his life sort of running, and I love that Luther says, unless I'm convinced by the testimony of the scriptures, I will not recant. And it's this is the only thing that matters. The scriptures are the only thing. And unless that convinces me, no, you're wrong. This is right. And so I was just really, I was really impressed by that. I was really enthralled, think that the guy gave up everything in his life because he was so convinced at the power of the gospel. And it's just a beautiful picture. And of course we're huge John Calvin fans, and I don't know that we've ever had a single sermon by Brandon where he doesn't quote Calvin at least once in the sermon. The guy is just the best expositor, commentator who's ever lived. The guy, I would love to have gone back and just even have 30 seconds of video on these guys. He had to be autistic. He had to be Asperger's. And I mean that in kind of a joke, but how did they possibly how did they possibly write all they wrote, read all they read, like expounded in the way? I mean, the guy, like the institutes are, I could write every day for the rest of my life and I would never even sniff as much as this guy wrote. So it was just, yeah, it'd be really interesting to know what kind of, I mean, and certainly that's, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have Twitter to, to distract them
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
time.
They
And
weren't on their
so,
phones all day.
yeah, that's right. But man, the amount of work that they did. So it's just really, it's really cool to me to see what these guys did coming out of this, like hundreds of years of sort of nothing, sort of wasteland of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, to come in and this just everything flourished. And of course, you know, then that sort of gave way to the rise of of this sort of pagan philosophy as well, coming out of the Renaissance and what we saw in the early United States and, you know, in the late 1700s. And so it wasn't all great, but it was interesting to watch guys think and to see what they were able to put together when they really focused on the power of scripture and what they were able to put together. So yeah, I mean, I just love the Reformation. I think it's super cool, super interesting. You know, I don't put any of those guys at the level of Paul or Jesus or anybody for sure, but
Sure.
but certainly I would say I'm very reformed at this point, and that a lot of that has changed over the last year or two. You know, I've been Calvinist for 10 years, and I would have said 10 years ago I was reformed, but I wasn't reformed. And what I mean by that is, like, when you really start to dive in, I mean, we're 1689, you know, Second London Baptist Confession. By the way, did you talk about, like, you know, if I meet somebody who's like, oh, I'm Westminster, I'm going to give them a hug. Like, they're a brother. They're not, you know, it's like, oh, you're just different confession than us, you know, you're Presby or whatever. And so, you know, we're confessional, we're a covenantal church. We understand and focus on dominion mandate, on covenantal theology, on patriarchy, on post-mill eschatology, on, and all of those things, to me, as you start to put those things together, really lead to what I would call truly reformed at this point, which I know apologia is as well. Like, you're, you know your church well and follow your pastors well. And but I would also take, you know, our brothers in the Presbyterian faith as well, the, you know, the guys in Ogden and the guys in Moscow, and say those are brothers that I love hanging out with and having good discussions with, for sure.
Mm-hmm. There's so much in there, that so many roads from what you said that I want to drive down. But I think the one that'll be most relevant to the listeners is that you brought up. So you have guys like Calvin, you know, who you said he was like autistic, right, in a joking kind of
Right.
way. But
Right.
this was a man who was so laser focused on spiritual truth, right? That's what he did, right?
Yep.
And I was just having a conversation with some friends yesterday, guys on YouTube called the Iron Disciples, and we're gonna be talking more soon. They and I, we're saying there used to be a time, I think, where men could respect a man like Calvin. Calvin probably didn't have a big bench press,
Right.
right?
Right.
Right. And it seems like the discussion about masculinity has gotten so low resolution that men who talk about spiritual truths, philosophical truths, and really do hit on something important aren't listened to, respected, or acknowledged, because the question is always, what color is your Bugatti? How much can you
Right.
deadlift? What's your notch count? Right.
Yep.
And that seems to me now look, when we're going to get, this is what I want to get to. There's a place for physical fitness and competency. And I do
Sure.
want to end up there because I think that is important. However, I think that there's a point where it's like, at what point are men going to figure out that spiritual gifts are their own gifts of spiritual insight and philosophical insight and mental power are their own form of gifts that
Sure.
don't necessarily fit 1,000% with spending spending 6 or 8 hours a week in the gym? Not that
Sure.
there's in contradiction, but there are some men that are called down that path. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So this is the discussion that I want to get into about masculinity, that there seems to be a way that it's become so low resolution
Sure.
and unable to perceive some men's gifts that we would have in the past.
No, it's really good. Yeah, I think there are times we miss the forest through the trees, right? Like we all know lifters, bodybuilders specifically, and your listeners probably won't be surprised by this. I hate bodybuilding. I hate everything about it.
Oh yeah.
It is shallow aesthetics based. Let me take pictures of myself, and post them on Instagram, and just train to look good with no, like, everybody wants to look better. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, but aesthetics should be a byproduct of performance improvement. And bodybuilders don't care about performance improvement. They only care about looking better. And that's a problem. And so I can't stand bodybuilding. And so we see people like this who have no grounding in truth, in the gospel, in scripture, in what they're called to be as men or as husbands or as fathers, but they're really good in the gym. We see this all the time. And so being good in the gym doesn't, I would argue it can make you a better husband, a better father, even a better Christian, and a better leader. I think it can definitely do
Yes.
that. But by and of itself, it doesn't. And so if not done for the right reasons, it won't. And so that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation, I'm going to say a thing I've actually been chewing on for the last 2 minutes, if I should say it or not, but I'm going to say it.
Say it.
And it's
Send it.
okay. So the other side of the equation is you take a guy like John Piper, who I love, but wouldn't call him masculine, right? There's not really anything about John Piper that I would say is tremendously masculine. I think he's been faithful to the Word of God for his entire life. My life has been wildly changed by John Piper and John Piper's ministry, his sermons, Desiring God, his book, all these things. I'm just gonna make a statement that something I've noticed that I don't even know that's true. But he's got at least one kid who's fallen away.
Yeah. Hard.
I never hear about how he was as a father or as a husband. Maybe he's fine as a husband. Maybe he's fine as both. He's a pacifist. And so I do see that there is a problem when you go all in on the other side as well. The guy's been a faithful pastor for 50 years, but there's something broken there, and I think there's something broken at the family level with his kids. And again, I want to be really careful. I don't want to just judge. I've looked at it because, again, I want to be clear. I really respect this man. But he never talked about these things. He never talked about patriarchy. He never talked about headship. There was something that was just sort of missing out of his ministry. And then you see, like, this is maybe a hole in his life. Again, I don't know. I'm just guessing. But I think you can see the dichotomy between, you've got the guy who is the Andrew Tates of the world, the all in on masculinity, treat women like crap, lift weights, eat meat, do the thing, that is completely godless. And then you've got a guy like John Piper, who is a wonderful, faithful Christian, who I absolutely believe will be singing "Holy, Holy, Holy" together in heaven one day. But there's still something that I'm like, I think you missed something here on the whole, like, masculinity trail. Father, husband, leader, so on and so forth. And so our goal is to find the right balance between those two things. And to be masculine where we're called to be masculine, to be not just men who study scripture. And by the way, that's so much more important than bench pressing. Like,
yeah,
so I want to be clear as I come on and talk about lifting weights and being strong and things like that. It's like, it's not the most important thing in the world. It's one of the things Mark Ripito says, that strength is the most important thing in the world, whether you want it to be or not. No, it's not. It's not even close to the most important thing in the world. Like, my relationship with God is a million times more. My relationship with my family, the way I lead my family, the way I lead my church. Like, yes, strength physically is probably the most important thing in the physical world, is to be physically strong, to be harder to kill, to be, all of those things. But I need to make sure that I'm following what Scripture calls me to be first. And I think one of those things he calls me to be is to be masculine, is to be strong, is to lead my family well, and to lead my church well, and to lead my kids well. And so some people miss that entirely, and then some people go all in on that and they miss all the other stuff. And for us, it's striking the right balance there, I think, is really key.
It's fantastic. You took it right where I wanted to, which was, you have one side of the dialogue about masculinity, which completely disregards intellectual, spiritual, sometimes even emotional gifts, for example, artists,
Yep.
poetry, stuff like that. But there's also a trap on that side where guys say, well, I have all these physical, spiritual gifts. I don't need to develop myself spiritually. It's like, well, that's
Right.
not true either. Because I was going to say the devil's advocate. How do we get guys out of that ditch into the middle of the road, right? Because again, you have the vanity, the masculinity for its own sake kind of aspect, and then you have the avoidance of any masculine presence in the world to focus purely on spiritual gifts, which I think can get Gnostic, right? So you have materialism on one side, you have Gnosticism on the other.
Yeah.
How do we get men out of both of those ditches and get them going down the middle of the road?
Well, that's the problem with everything we face, right? So there's the ditch on each side, and the goal is to stay on the road. And so this is the problem with the fat pastor, the quote unquote fat pastor. And I want to be clear, like, listen, I've struggled with this stuff. I mean, one of the reasons I think that I'm a good coach is because I've struggled with most of these things in my life. And so I just recently lost 50 pounds. I was like, this is, business had been good, but stressful. And I realized, like, I'm just, I'm eating too much. I'm drinking too much alcohol. And it's like, it's not healthy for me. And I'm not going to be that guy. And so the problem I see with the quote unquote fat pastor is that it shows that there's a lack of discipline somewhere in his life. And I think that's a problem. I think one of the things that we have to look for, and by the way, I think we all have these things, like maybe it doesn't show up as a physical thing, but I think we're called as men to try to find that weak link in our chain. Where's the place that you're undisciplined? Do you drink too much alcohol? Do you let yourself watch porn? You play like you're lazy? Do you sleep in too much? You stay up late at night? What is the thing? Or multiple things for a lot of us probably. And my concern when I see a pastor who's really out of shape is my thought is like, well, where else is he undisciplined? Is he undisciplined in his finances? Should I worry about the church finances because this guy's so undisciplined and he's 400 pounds? Like, and I don't know, maybe some of that's on me, but I think the reality is like that's a truth that needs to be confronted. And so, but more than that, for any man, not just the fat pastor, right? But that's a problem. And I think it's especially tough for somebody who bears that load physically because their lack of discipline is so evident just by looking at them. You just look at somebody and be like, well, you're fat and that's your problem. Right? Like, we don't know who's got $25,000 in credit card debt. That's much harder to see. Same problem, by the way. Same physical lack of discipline. That's a problem. And so for us, we're called to be honest with ourselves about these things and recognize where those are and to cut that stuff out of our life, to make war on that stuff. And so for me, the strength training piece is something that we can do that what I've recognized is this. When I am strong and I perform well, I look better, I feel better. All the health metrics say that I'm healthier, right? The chances of me walking not just my daughters down the aisle at their wedding, but my granddaughters down the aisle, the ones who are not even born yet, right? Like that tremendously increases, right? If God has put me on this earth to be able to bless other people, to speak truth to other people, then by being strong and being healthy, I am very proactively elongating that. Now, look, everybody's got their time when God's going to take them off the earth, right? But we also know it's just like Proverbs, right? So you look at the book of Proverbs and it says, if you do this, then the chances of these outcomes are much higher, right? But you're not guaranteed that, right? You can do all the stuff in Proverbs. You can still be poor. You can still die young. You can still like any of those things. But the chances of those things, we can look at people's lives that do these things. The chances that we're going to live a longer life, a healthier life, a higher quality of life, which is really what it's about, is exponentially increased when we're strong. And so we want to focus on strength training. And I want to do those things in a way that's not where I have to sell myself to the gym, where I have to be in the gym 20 hours a week. For most of our clients that Barbell Logic, they train like 3 hours a week. It's like 3 times a week, maybe 4 times a week for an hour. So it's 3-4 hours a week. That's it. And so it's a very small percentage of your time. And we focus on minimum effective dose for maximum return on investment. So we do the thing. So we don't need to do 20 exercises in the gym. We do 3 exercises. We do 4 exercises, not very much, to get the biggest bang for your buck. And so when I'm able to do that, what we have found is that we don't just improve physically, and obviously we do improve physically, but we see benefit in this mentally, emotionally, socially. Again, I don't think directly spiritually, but I think, like, again, I've been in places in my life where I'm unhealthy physically, and it absolutely affects my spiritual life. And so I want to be really careful, because I don't think it's more important than all of these things. I don't think it's more important than being a great husband, or a great father, or studying the word, or the spiritual disciplines. But I do think it makes all those things better. And I've experienced that in my own life, and I've experienced that in the life of our clients. And so that's the road we're trying to walk on, and not get in either ditch. We don't want to land in the ditch where we don't care anything about physical health or performance, and all we do is focus on spiritual disciplines. And likewise, we don't want to fall into the other ditch of being the Andrew Tates of the world, where we're just, all we care about is aesthetics and women and the manosphere problem, right? And I know you kind of came out of that background. Like, we see this all the time. Like, the manosphere, I think we're going to see a huge reformation of the manosphere over the next couple of years, because these guys they're broken, and they've accomplished everything that the manosphere tells them they're supposed to accomplish, and there's no joy. And so they're like, what am I missing? Well, like, I know you're missing Jesus. That's what you're missing, right? And so this aesthetics and performance and physical, without the foundation of the word, without the foundation of God in your life, is empty. It's shallow and it's broken. But I do think you can also go too far the other way, and you can focus entirely on spiritual matters, and not anything in the masculinity physical realm. And I think that's also a ditch on the other side.
So yes, and I agree with everything you said, and so I think what's the question that I'm sitting with now is, so the fat pastor, or the fat man, or whatever, that's an easy, that's a, when I say easy target to pick on, I don't mean that they're a target. I don't mean that we're actually picking on them. So maybe I'll phrase my words. That's an easy problem to identify, because in some sense it's endemic to all of almost American society now, for sure. And obesity is a growing problem around the world. It's actually a significant and growing problem, particularly in Asia and places like that too. So there's that aspect. But then there's also, what about the really skinny kid? You know,
I this question
But yeah, I mean, but I think these are important questions.
Oh, it's super important,
because you have this manosphere image of become powerful physically, monetarily, sexually, right? That's what the manosphere is selling. It's essentially Nietzscheanism, right? It's in not so many words. And so you can look at the overweight pastor, and you could say that guy needs to reform something in his life. But then you have these skinny kids that, what's the pitch to them? Because I think it's not that they don't want power. I think that they do. And I don't mean power for its own sake. Power, presence, gravitas, as Pastor Michael Foster says. I think that there's something else going on there. And you've probably seen this with Barbell Logic. The guy who's never developed himself physically at all, maybe he's not undisciplined in terms of eating, right? Or self-medicating with food, but there's something missing in that young man,
for sure,
as well. Let's speak into that for a second.
Yeah, it's a lack of voluntary hardship is what it is.
Okay.
They've never done hard things. And so I preach this to my kids all the time. Like, what is the value of hard work what it gets you, or is the value in the hard work itself? Because I would argue that it's actually the latter. That when we like, yes, I like to work, and I like to make money from my work, and I like to, go out and work in my yard or my garden or mow the lawn, and I can look at the end and be like, oh, look what I did. But like, the value in it is actually in the work itself. And the problem we get today, because most of us work at in a cubicle, in an office, at a desk, like, people don't do manual labor anymore. And so I would actually not argue too much with people who say, like, oh, guys, 100 years ago, they really didn't need to work out that much because they did it in their job. I'm like, okay, maybe that's true, but that's not the case today. Like, I know I'm a CEO of a company. I sit at a desk. I'm sitting at it right now. If I don't get up and squat and deadlift, I don't do anything hard. I'm not a farmer. I'm not a mechanic. I'm not, like, I don't do stuff like that. And so for the skinny kid, the 155-pound skinny kid, who, by the way, like, one of the biggest things you got to fight with a kid like that is, like, he already has abs, but, like, nobody cares because he's 155 pounds. Nobody cares if you have abs, right? Like, not when you're 155 pounds, and you don't want to lose it. Like, you're confused. You need to get strong. I say this all the time. So, like, my wife is really strong, and I don't know if you've seen my wife. That. She is the most feminine, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. I mean, she doesn't have an ounce of masculinity in her whatsoever. I mean, she doesn't know that she's strong. I mean, she's probably heard me say it now enough on podcasts. But let me tell you how strong my wife is. My wife's 45 years old, birthed 2 kids. She is as feminine as gorgeous, smoking hot. She deadlifts 402. She squatted at a meet. 402. The reason that's a weird number is in kilos. She squatted 347.
What?
She benches 235. Now, listen, you guys go on my Instagram and see. You would never know. She's just a normal soccer mom. She just looks like a soccer mom, right? She's not muscular. She's not like, you wouldn't look at her and be like, she's super fit. She's just like a normal looking soccer mom. She just doesn't know. So here's the problem. I talk to guys all the time, like, 95% of the guys listening to this podcast right now can't lift as much as my 45-year-old soccer mom wife does. That's a problem. That's a problem. Any guy on earth, I don't care who you are, I don't care what your genetics are, any guy on earth can squat 350 pounds and deadlift 500 pounds, like, with enough training. No steroids, unless you're starting at 60, you can do that, right? And you should. And by the way, anybody should be able to squat 300 pounds and deadlift 400 pounds for anything that life's going to throw at you. Over that, if you get to the point where you can squat 300 and deadlift 400 pounds, and you're like, I don't know that I really want to get stronger because I'm theoretically risking injury, like, okay, that's actually totally fine. But if you can't squat 225 and deadlift 300 pounds, you're not even strong enough for the stuff that life will throw at you. Like, and that matters. Like, you need to be able to be strong enough to just do normal stuff in life. And so, but then the other piece of it is this. So that's what it gets you. That's what it gets you, strength training. But what about the value of the voluntary hardship itself? Like, nobody's ever going to make you put a bar on your back and squat. Squatting sucks. It's not any fun. Nobody likes it. I don't care who you are, right? You're a psychopath if you like to squat. I hate squat. I squatted yesterday at my cabin by myself. I was down at the cabin working, and because I'm an idiot, I ended up putting up a squat rack down at my cabin on the porch, and I squatted and deadlifted yesterday all by myself, which is always hard to do because there's nobody around. There's nobody, you're just like, I'm just going to do this. And so it sucks. It sucks, but it's hard. But how many times do we get the opportunity to choose hard anymore? Like, it's pretty rare. And so, we will often be thrown into involuntary hardship. Like, that happens sometimes, right? You get, like, lose your job, lose your wife, lose a kid, there's some sort of terrible event. The economy goes bad, whatever the thing is, right? You get cancer and you're thrown into involuntary hardship. And even see guys that are thrown in prison, that's involuntary hardship. How often does prison refine someone for the better? Not that often. Sometimes.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah. But yeah, it's not
thing, right?
It's not the most common outcome.
Any involuntary hardship has the chance to refine you and make you better, but it's not guaranteed to refine you and make you better, right? Somebody experiences a tragedy. Sometimes they get a lot worse. Sometimes they become addicted to drugs. Sometimes they get super depressed. Sometimes, like, whatever. But I would argue that voluntary hardship almost always refines you and makes you better. Almost always refines you and makes you better because you chose hard, because you chose to put a bar on your back. Now, is squatting and deadlifting the only option that we have for voluntary hardship? Of course not. There's lots of places. The reason we choose strength training is because it generally works for everybody, right? So not everybody can go out and run a marathon, or not everybody can, like, whatever voluntary hardship thing is that you choose, that's not always available, but anybody can squat and deadlift. Anybody can do the main lifts. And that voluntary hardship of choosing that thing, like, you'll be surprised that when your boss fires you, or your girlfriend breaks up with you, or cancer hits, like you're a little better able to handle it now because you chose to do things voluntarily that were hard. And so that's the preparation it gets you. So that's the thing, that the value is in the work itself, not just, oh, and by the way, you get bigger muscles and you get to perform better and you look better and all those things. That's what it gets you on the end result. But I would actually argue that what the voluntary hardship itself does is that's where the value is. It's in the work. It's not even what it produces in the end. So it refines you physically, mentally, socially, emotionally, and that's what we get out of it. So that's why we do those things.
So as you're talking through this, I find myself wondering, because you can look at the fat guy and the skinny guy. You can see both of these guys are avoiding some form of voluntary hardship, whether it's the hardship of saying no to whatever it is you want to eat, or whether it's the hardship of getting into the gym and actually like putting up something heavy when you don't want to. And so a lack of desire to engage in voluntary hardship, I identify as coming from a lack of fathers. Like it's a father's job. I'm not a father yet. God willing, I'll get to be. But it seems to me that part of a father's job, maybe one of the most important parts, is to teach his sons, particularly, and his daughters as well. And you could probably speak to this, about the value of voluntary hardship when the kids don't want to experience this. And so maybe this, in some ways, I think this all roots back to father hunger. And I guess the question that I'm sitting with, and maybe you can speak about this from your experience as a father, is whether the overweight guy had a father that was too soft on him, and the skinny guy had a father who was too hard on him. Like the skinny guy doesn't want to deal with voluntary hardship because it's terrifying, because it reminds him that his dad was a monster. And the overweight guy doesn't want to engage with voluntary hardship because the dad just wasn't there in the first place. Does that map, or am I oversimplifying?
No, it maps. I actually, I've never heard anybody say that, but it makes a lot of sense. I do think there's times when the person who overeats sometimes is a rebound effect from, it's possible that they also had a father that was really hard, and their sort of rebellion out of that is to overeat. Certainly. Yeah, that's super interesting that you say that. It's interesting. It's paired with delayed gratification, this stuff. And when people, if I can get on here and give you my sales pitch about why squatting and deadlifting is awesome and stuff, and I get everybody excited on the podcast about like, I want to get really strong, and like that's super fun. I'd love to do that, right?
You could do that.
But the reality is that there are always days that you don't want to do those things. Now, I actually really like to train. I always have liked to train. I won my pro card in strongman, was on the World's Strongest Man circuit for years, and I actually like the training, the preparation for that stuff more than the actual competition. I love competition. I always did fine at the competition, but I actually really enjoy training. There are a lot of people that look at training as sort of the spoonful of medicine. That's the way they they don't enjoy the training itself. But the reality is that nobody enjoys training every single day. Right? There's tons of days that I don't want to train. Those are the days you have to train. Because anybody can train on the days that you feel great, as you wake up and you're just like, man, I slept 8 hours and feel good and I feel strong and I'm going for a bench PR today, so I'm super excited about it. It's the days that you're like, dude, I gotta do 5 sets of 5 on squats. It's terrible. Those are the days you have to train. And so like that's the lesson that has to be learned by that you have to teach your kids. Like we do, like, I do this all the time. So I can go next room over. My kids have a chore sheet. And I say it's chores, but it's actually like much more than chores. They get paid to work. They're employees basically of us. And we don't pay them for cleaning their rooms and stuff like that's expected. Right. But my 18-year-old, she goes and gets groceries for the family, puts gas in the cars, washes the cars, they've got a long list, a checklist of things to do. And there are days that girls get up and they're super motivated to do their work and get paid. But there's lots of days that they don't want to do it at all. Well, guess what you're going to do today? You're going to do the work anyway, because there's a lesson to be learned there. That's the voluntary hardship. It actually isn't voluntarily hard if you're like really excited to go in and bench press for a new max and hit a new PR. Like that's not hard. That's fun. Point. It's putting the bar on your back and squatting when you don't want to do it. It's when your kid was sick all night last night, throwing up, and you've got 2 hours sleep and you've still got to come in and work out today and you really don't want to. That's voluntary hardship. That's the lesson. It's the same lesson that you're teaching your kids about delaying gratification. It's the same problem that people have when they overspend and they live, well above their means. They can't delay gratification. People that can delay gratification and choose hard things anyway, that's where the lesson is. And so for us as parents, we can teach our kids this stuff. My kids work out. Now, they're kids. So I'm not the Bulgarian weightlifting coach to my kids. We've tried to model it well. They watch what mom does. They know she loves it. My wife and I train together. It's like sort of quiet time for us. They know when we're in the gym training, they don't knock on the door and stuff. And they do those things because they want to kind of be like mom, and they're in that. I don't train them like I do my clients, but it's still a lesson that I've taught them how to do. And I've taught them how to work. I've taught them how to work around the house. I've taught them how to work on days they don't want to work. Sorry, I get up all the time and don't want to be a CEO of this company right now, but I'd rather just like watch Netflix, but I don't get to choose that. And so these are the lessons that we're teaching our kids, is that ability to delay gratification, ability to do voluntary hardship meaning things you actually don't want to do, not just things that are hard, not just pushing yourself to like run the extra mile or breathe really heavy, but to actually do a thing you don't want to do. These are the lessons that we're trying to teach our kids. That's what we're called to do as parents. And so we do that with our daughters. What would it look like if I had a son? I think I'd be terrible. I think I would push him way too hard. I mean, I think God knew what he was doing when he gave me daughters, that I don't know, I'd have a gay eye stancer for a kid. No, not really. This is a joke. I don't know. I think I've been able to have the right amount of toughness for my daughters in teaching them these lessons. And I don't know how to do it. I mean, there's a lot of listeners out there who are doing it with sons, and I think they probably do it really well. I don't know how to do that because I don't have any boys. So, but what I know is that we're called to do it regardless of whether we have sons or daughters, or, other men in our church that we disciple, men in our community. Like, these are things as a matter of fact, this weekend, we're doing a squat and deadlift camp here at the house for all the guys in my church and all the guys I know. We have a sister Reformed church, and they're all coming to the house to do a squat and deadlift camp. And then we're going to eat barbecued meats and drink beer and smoke pipes. And so it's just it's a day of testosterone and masculinity. But for me, it's a way that I can give back. My Barbell Logic is an expensive company. It's a high trust purchase. It's, it's $225 plus a month to hire one of our coaches. And most of these guys in the Reformed community, they're single income homes, as they should be. Their wives stay at home. They're working. A lot of them are younger. They're in their 20s. They're working blue collar jobs. They don't have a bunch of money. And so they're not going to be able to hire me at Barbell Logic, but I can give back to them by teaching them some of the things I know. So it's just a totally free camp that I'm doing for these guys. And I'm like, hey, come on out. I'm going to teach you how to squat. I'm going to teach you how to deadlift. I'm going to tell you how to put it in your program. I'm going to teach you how to do this stuff. And then we're going to sit around and eat barbecued meats together. And the other thing I want to do is talk to the other guys about what they do for a living, so that we can better support each other in our occupations in the community. Because like, if there's a guy in my church or in a sister church that's a plumber and I need plumbing, that's the guy I'm going to hire. I'm not going to go look for the cheapest price. I'm going to hire that guy. And I'm not going to ask for by the way, for listeners, do not ask for the discount.
Yep.
Pay the guy what he's worth. Like, we are to outdo each other in honor. And so for me, I'm going to overpay the guy, and he's going to try to do more work than what he charges for. And so that's how we do it. So for me, that's a way I can give back to this community, because like, I know these guys probably can't hire me as a coach, so I can just coach them for free in places and do a deadlift camp and teach them how to do this stuff and eat good meat together and have a good community event.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you said that, because I know Reformation Coffee, of course, is the sponsor of the podcast. Shout out Brandon Lansdowne, Reformation Coffee. And in the ad that I did when this episode comes out next week, when people are listening, this will be a week ago. So the episode that you guys listened to a week ago, that was what my ad about Reformation Coffee is. Yep. Look, if we want to talk about sovereignty, we have to not just cheer our bros on who are building systems of wealth creation independently. We have to support them. We have to give them our money, right? Full price money too. Like, stop buying beans from Starbucks or whatever giant woke corporation. Find how many different guys, are out there with businesses that you can help support. Yeah, you'll pay a little bit more, right? But aren't we helping each other create systems of wealth creation and sovereignty so we can get separate from the beast system? Isn't
That's
that
exactly
the
right.
goal?
Yep.
Right. And I don't hear enough people really. This is a drum that I've been banging on for a while. Like, all these guys are starting businesses. Pay your brothers, help
That's
them
right.
out, start
Don't
their
ask for the discount.
entrepreneurship. Exactly. Don't ask for the discount. Yeah. Don't just cheer them on. Like, yes, share them on social media. Yes, talk to your friends about them. Do all that stuff as well. But pull some cash out of your wallet and support their business and help, even if they don't go anywhere with it. I have some friends who started a t-shirt company. It didn't ultimately work out for them. I still bought a t-shirt. It ended up being the most expensive t-shirt that they sold. You know what I mean?
Right.
Here you go. Sure. Start your business. Be successful, right? And I don't hear enough people talking about that as so essential to entrepreneurship, because we don't naturally want to ask our friends for help. I get that. But it's incumbent on us to look around at our bros trying to do a thing and support them in doing it with all that we have and all that we can.
For sure. Have you read Doug Wilson's book, The Gashmu Saith It? That's the
I've started it.
Okay, so he's got the documentary, whatever it is, 9 Ways to Save the World. Is it 9 ways? 11 ways? I don't know what it is. So,
and which is to save the world.
Okay, thank you. So, and that's based on this book, and a lot of the book is about this sort of thing, but he's got a great chapter specifically on this very thing. Like, this is what all of Christ for all of life actually means. Like, it's hiring if you have a brother that's a mechanic, that's where you take your car. If you got one that's a plumber or general, like we have general contractors in our church. So any work that I get done around the house, I'm going to hire those guys, right? Even if they're not as skilled, even if they're a little more expensive, like, what you're doing is you're supporting the community, the brotherhood of what we do. And so how do they get better? How do they get more skilled? How do they make, like, this is the opportunity, right? This is one of the things I've been able to help Brandon at Reformation Coffee. And listen, Reformation Coffee is amazing. Like, it's the best coffee I've ever had. But it was good for me to be able to sit down and walk through some of the business steps with Brandon and Cassie to help them with their coffee. There's a way that I could contribute there, right? And so certainly I'm a subscriber to their coffee. I've never asked for a discount. I pay full price for the coffee, and I've invested in the company. I'm going to pay full price for the coffee. That's the deal. And so for us, it's the same thing. Like, we have a bunch of young families in our church. They're all subscribers to the coffee, right? Like, and I get it. It's craft coffee. It's more expensive than Folgers, but what are you going to drink Folgers for? Like, there's better coffee out there, and a pastor, someone that you can support in Christendom to help build into Christendom. That's the point. And so, like, to me, it's a no-brainer. And I realize a lot of people listen to this and be like, yeah, you're the CEO of the company. You've got the money to do it. But, like, I've done this my whole life. Like, it's just make a sacrifice somewhere else. I would go so far as to say, Brandon won't say this, but I'll say it because I think it's true. If you're a church and you're serving Starbucks or Black Rifle Coffee or like some sort of you're in sin. What are you? You're literally spending church money to give to a woke organization to serve terrible woke coffee to your parishioners. That's a problem. Right now, it doesn't have to be Reformation, but you better find somebody to support, whether it's Reformation or a local coffee roaster in your town that's like, we need to be looking at building into Christendom in everything we do, period. So that means I want to build into Christendom when I hire somebody to fix my car, the mechanic. When the guy that mows my lawn is a homeschool classical conversation dad that owns a lawn care company. There was no question that I was going to hire him because he's the guy that's going to build into Christendom and mow my lawn. Like, I could have hired anybody to mow my lawn, but like, why would I hire that guy? I don't even know if he was good at what, but like, he's the guy because we're building into Christendom. That's the point. And so, like, man, I got a buddy that says this is a white person problem. It's a white evangelical Christian problem. So I know I've heard other people talk about white evangelicals lately, and it's caused lots of problems. I don't know if you've heard this, but
go for it. Maybe
we just want the discount. We want the brotherly discount. Like, hey, bro, can't you hook me up with the discount? Like, that's just this thing that, like, maybe you're in Phoenix. You're not from there originally, right? You got like a northern accent.
I'm originally from Phoenix, but I've
you have like no accent. You don't have a Phoenix accent at all, but you don't have really hardly any accent. Well, you know what I mean. So maybe it's a Midwestern thing. Midwestern people, and I'll joke about white evangelicals, but I think evangelicals are terrible. We asked for the discount. Like, and we ask for the discount because they're like, it's the worst it's not like it's, the brother-in-law deal, but instead it's like, hey man, since we go to church together, can you hook me up with a good deal on the plumbing? That's evil. Don't do that. Like, support this guy. If this is one of your brothers who runs a plumbing company, pay him what he's worth, pay him market value for the thing. And then the plumber, your buddy, he should try to provide more work than what he charges for. Like, that's the point. We're trying to outdo each other with this stuff. That's how we build into Christendom. So, sorry, I get all heated. I'm all for Klimt. I'm gonna like.
No, man. Keep.
It just is what it is. I see this all the time. Like, churches, I can't believe churches that I'll show up and they're serving Starbucks, or they're serving like whatever like, really, Starbucks? Like, I get it. We can't, like, there is certainly a line. I can't go through every single thing I purchase and be like, I don't know, are these napkins made by a woke company, or are these paper plates made? Like, I get it, right? Like, at some point, but you know, with the coffee, what you're doing, or with some of these other big purchases, or when you're choosing to support, a big woke company, as opposed to if you've got somebody in your church to do this. This is the Amish and the Mennonites figured this out years ago. I don't necessarily want to live like them, although it doesn't sound terrible. They
especially now.
That's right. They only hire, like, if you're Amish or you're a Mennonite, they only hire other Amish in their local community to do a thing. And if they don't have somebody that does that, then they will hire someone in the Amish community outside of their community, like in one of the neighboring towns, to do the thing. And if that doesn't exist, then they still go local and they support local business, even if it's not Amish, and they try not to give it to, woke. They try to give it to somebody who's at least religious. And so they figured this out, that this is how you do this and how you build into Christendom. And so I'm amazed at what we do in evangelical Christianity, that we just like, whatever the best deal is where I'm going to spend my money. Like, is there there's no other thought to this, to like who you're actually supporting? And I hate that it's turned this way. I saw this coming years ago. I told my wife years ago, and I started to see it with Starbucks. And I saw like Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby, and I go, ooh, it's only a matter of time before every company in the United States is going to choose a side. Now look what's happened.
Oh yeah,
everybody's choosing sides. Now you got trannies advertising beer. And you're like, okay, well, we know what side they're on. So not that beer. Mm-hmm. So anyway. So support Reformation Coffee or your local Christian coffee roaster at your church, and stop buying woke coffee or bad coffee. Don't serve your people Folgers. It's disgusting. Nobody likes Folgers. So, all right, I digress.
No, this is perfect, because in Reformation May, you've probably heard me say this, is that, as part of all these podcasts through Reformation May, which providentially are turning out to be some of my biggest guests ever, I'm going to be using Reformation Coffee. In fact, the ad for this will probably play just before right now when I edit the podcast. Is Brandon's teaching me how to do a pour over cup of coffee, because I like drip coffee, right? And so and it's all part of this. Is like, okay, if I'm going to support this coffee company, right? I should learn how to actually drink coffee. I should learn how to taste the way that these people who roast it make it. Right. I should make this part of my life and make it fun and not treat it like a chore.
That's right.
Right. How can I actually learn something about this? And I actually I haven't encountered the asking for the discount thing of evangelicals, but I've certainly seen it in plenty of other places where it's like, no. And I think that the post-mill eschatology actually speaks against that. Kind of conceptually, to say, are we trying to build something?
That's
or are we just trying to make things grease the wheels as easily as possible until Jesus comes back and bails us out?
That's
like,
right.
I'm on the side
point.
I'm on the side of like, well, let's actually try to build something for the future, for the kingdom, and that actually takes self-sacrifice. One of my favorite quotes that I heard years ago: "It isn't effort until it begins to hurt."
Yep.
And it's like, are you really putting effort into building for the kingdom if you're trying to do it in a way that hurts the least? And
That's
spending money hurts. If you can go buy woke coffee, for $5, or buy a bag of beans for 10, or whatever it is from a man actually trying to build sovereignty, for the kingdom. Yeah, that extra, it's meaningful, but it's a worthy sacrifice. It's maybe it's a voluntary hardship in a way. And I think this kind of dovetails with the whole lifting thing as well. Are you going to apply your own voluntary hardship to not just the gym, but to where you make your purchasing decisions for the things that are meaningful in your life?
For sure. That's great. Yeah, that's hard to do because it's easy to go to the big department stores, right? It's a lot harder to go to the mom and pop local places, and they don't have as good a selection, and the prices aren't as good, and all the things. But again, what are we building? It's interesting to talk about the post-mill side of this. I've only been post-mill for about a year, and I just was one of those guys that didn't care about eschatology. I was like, I don't know, Jesus wins in the end. I guess it's fine. And I knew I wasn't really like left behind rapture sort of. And I was like, that's not it. But I don't know really what I am. And so as I've become post-mill the last year, you recognize it changes a lot about the way you live your life on a daily basis. And you know what's awesome is I don't have to sit around and worry about the world I'm leaving my grandkids to. Like, it's not, because you're like, we're building into this thing that's greater than ourselves, that's longer. Like, so this isn't like, or your church, like our church, right? So our church is 10 months old. Brandon, we planted the church 10 months ago. We actually meet in our house. That's not the goal, is not to meet in our house long term. We'd like to find a building for sure. But you don't have to it's not like we have a 3-year plan for the church. Like, no, this is hundreds of years. Like, this church, our great grandkids are going to go to this church. And so you can, it can move on God's timing. Now we're going to work really hard to grow the church, and we want to support Brandon as a full-time pastor and all those things, but it's like, it really does change everything. So when you think about even like your coffee purchases or the working out in the gym or whatever the thing of choosing voluntary hardship, it's because you're actually building into something. Not, oh man, what kind of world am I going to leave for my grandkids that's just going to be hell in a handbasket? And, we're not guaranteed. I don't know that America is going to be better 2 generations from now than it is now. Might not be. But what I know is that Jesus sits on the throne, and all authority's been given to him, and we're to go out and make disciples and build into this thing. So that's what we're doing. And so I trust that what he says is true, which is, so I can actually think about those things when I purchase my coffee or whatever the thing is. ReformationCoffee.com. There you go.
Reformation Coffee, sub free for the one free bag of coffee.
That's right. Your first month is free with a subscription.
Yeah, go for it. Do it. So I was really, I guess, lucky in a sense, providential, in that I got exposed to Calvinism and postmillennialism just at about the same time.
Nice.
I was taking my membership class for Apologia as Calvinist, and I didn't really know what that was. So I had to think through, the 5 solas and Tulip and all that at the same time as I was learning about postmillennialism.
Nice.
And so I've had to work out backwards in time how evangelical Christianity arrived at this point. Like, hey guys, this is pretty cool. This lines up. It's like, Will, there's been so much going on for 50 years to get to this point.
That's right.
So, but it seems like now it's all culminating in this discussion of Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Like, if we're really going to build into something, yes, our bodies, yes, our purchasing decisions, yes, sovereignty, yes, wealth creation, yes, pushing back on mandates and wokeness and all that stuff. But it's like, okay, if we're really going to build, are we going to build into government? And are we going to make sure that we're building into something, as opposed to building these separatist kind of societies, right?
Yep.
So there's been a lot of controversy over the past week around what Christian nationalism is, whether it should be advocated for or should be advocated against. And this is kind of the moment that we're sitting in. Are you open to a discussion about Christian nationalism?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So what does it mean to you personally, and what and I guess it's probably the same question as what would you like it to mean, or what do you see the dialogue is? Like, there's a gap there somewhere between, because I think Christian nationalism, how I conceive of it, is not really an arguable thing, but a lot of guys are arguing about it. So maybe we can talk about what we see it as.
I think the word throws people off. I mean, like, before we even get into what it means for me, I think the word nationalism freaks people out. It freaks people out because
Christian does too.
Well, yes, for sure, but it shouldn't freak Christians out. Oh yeah, both those words freak out the secular world for sure. the Christian part shouldn't freak Christians out, but the nationalism, they think of like, oh, the National Socialist Party. It's like, it's the, there's these words that have been associated with history, that the word nationalism has, meant, white supremacy, or like that's what it conjures up for people. And so I get that. But if we just take a step back and just go like, well, okay, hold on. So, well, what is that? Well, instead of trying to define what you think the media is talking about when they say that, or, oh, they're talking about this, this crazy group of Timothy McVeigh and Oklahoma City bombing people, like whatever that is, right?
Right.
Instead, if I just go, okay, hold on. Do we want Christian families? Yes. Do we want Christian churches? Yes. Do we want Christian schools? Yes. Do we want Christian communities? Yes. Then the next question is, well, don't we just want a Christian country? Don't we want Christian cities, Christian counties, Christian states, Christian? Yes. So I think if you can explain it to people that way, they're like, who would argue against that? Because again, I've heard Vody say, like, what's the alternative? You want a secular country? You're gonna fight, right? You're gonna fight for paganism. So yes, of course. I want a Christian government. Do I think that's going to happen in my lifetime? No, probably not. But again, I'm playing the long game. Doesn't matter. I don't think Jesus is coming back in the next 18 months. I think we got a while. So, it's like, so, he could, but I don't, and so to me, that's the direction I see it going. I think eventually, because Jesus sits on his throne, because Jesus is actually reigning right now today, then over time he's going to, and listen, I also think it's really hard for us to see this in America, because I think we've probably peaked in America, and I think we're on our way downhill. Now, I hope I love America. I hope we turn it around, but right now we have our head up our hind end. But the reality is if you look at like how many people were Christians 50 years ago, how many people has Jesus saved in the last 50 years? Like how many people are getting saved in Asia and Africa and other, and other nations? Like lots. And so, and again, because the New Testament says that, there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, like that doesn't exist in the New Testament. And so as more and more people become Christians, like God is reconciling the world back to himself. I don't know. Is America going to keep getting better? Or is it some point like somebody overtakes us as the world power? Like that's very possible. So I think it's easy for us in America to be like, it's getting worse. It's hard to actually argue for postmillennialism in America right now, because they're like, it's clearly worse today than it was 5 years ago. That might actually be true. But like, we're not talking about America. We're talking about the world. And so if Jesus is reconciling to himself, and like we know that over time, like we believe the world is going to become primarily Christian at some point. Like that's what that outlook is. Now, the question is, do I want my country to be Christian? How could I not want that? Who would argue against that? And they argue it not because it's not what they want. They argue against it because the words scare them, I think. I think they see Christian nationalism and they think this is a scary word. This is going to lead to some sort of weird version of like white supremacy, MAGA, Trump stuff. And like, I don't want that. And I get it. I don't want that either. But that's not what Christian nationalism is. If we want Christian families, Christian churches, Christian schools, then we have to want Christian nations. Why would you want, I want a secular nation? Like that doesn't make any sense. So that's the way I approach this. And it's, I just think we have to get over the fear of the word. But I think there's a lot of history in the word, I get it. Nationalism is a scary word for people, and it's meant bad things over the course of history. So I get it. I get where people are coming from and why they rise up against that.
Oh, it's interesting. I agree with you. I agree with everything that you said. And it's interesting about the word nationalism scaring people, that it conjures up images of Nazis, and I get that. But Nazis, the German nation was taken down by other nations that had national identities.
That's true.
Right?
That's
so
true.
It's like nationalism is Nazism. Like, well, we defeated Nazism with other nations.
Yeah.
Right. It's such a low and I love the question that floats around on Twitter, like, who did the world consider the universal bad guy before Adolf Hitler? You know what I mean? Before you could reduce everything to that, right? Okay, so we can go into that.
By the way, do you think that America has trouble with this specifically because we are the melting pot of the world as well? Like there's this
Trouble.
feeling, you know what I mean?
What trouble with what specifically?
With Christian nationalism, the idea of nationalism, like what is our identity, right? So again, I know what it is, and I'm not arguing this, but it's the argument I see is that like, well, what is our identity? We're people from every nation, tribe, and tongue that have come to America and done this thing. It's just like the world's great melting pot. We're a very young nation, right? 500 years old. And so you can go back, like you can go to England and be like, we've got thousands of years of like, we know what the identity of England is, or Sweden, or what you've got that. In America, it's a little bit tougher. So we know we have an identity. Obviously, our identity often is like individualism and freedom and liberty and the things that we stood on in 1776 and since then. But do you think that causes some issues for people that they're like, I don't like, what is our identity? We're all these different colors and races and people and backgrounds and sort of, it's not like a nation. They almost look at it as a blending of all the nations that have come here. And I was thinking about this the other day. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not arguing on that behalf, but do you think that is one of the things that throws people for a loop there? It's like, what is our identity? As soon as you try to define our identity, they'll start to tie that towards racism or a certain demographic class or whatever.
So I have a unique perspective on this very question, because I've been to more than 30 countries around the world. So I've been to China, I've been to India, I've been to South America. I spent 6 months traveling around India alone.
Nice.
Right. So a lot of I've been to Morocco and Africa. So I've seen the world outside of the United States. Most Americans haven't. Most Americans who are liberals have not seen the world outside of Europe. So they travel and they're like, why can't America be more like Europe? We're so backwards. It's like, the reality is America is the most advanced country in the world.
For sure.
It is the only place in the world, truthfully, really worth being. Now, that isn't to insult other countries. Like, other countries have their own unique value and values. But once you actually see how most of the world lives, you become incredibly grateful for the United States. And what I say is that not every country in the world needs to be like America, but the world needs a country like America. That is inarguable for me. And I can talk for a long time about that. I think, and I really believe this, I think a curse of shame has been placed on America so that Americans are incapable of seeing just how good they are. A curse of guilt and shame has been placed on America so that we're more ready to tear ourselves down out of this curse of guilt and shame than we are to look around the world and say, it's really bad out there. I don't think Americans have gotten really comfortable with that, because in many places it is actually really bad. Yeah. Like, for example, China. A lot of people say we're going to compete with China. First of all, I've been to China. I spent 6 weeks traveling around China in 2018. China is absolutely blanketed with smog across the entirety of this country. You can take a bullet train from Beijing, which is, the sky is orange, right, to Xi'an, right, or Chongqing is another country in mainland China. A bullet train, traveling hundreds of miles per hour, gray cloud over the entire landscape, abandoned buildings everywhere, construction projects completely abandoned, ghost cities, right? And this is on the main highways that people travel on. I met a Chinese scientist. I don't forget his first name, but his last name was Ho. He was from mainland China. He escaped, and he's on YouTube. He helped design the heads-up display system for the F-15 Raptor. Right. So I met and I talked to this guy recently, and I hope to have him on a podcast sometime. And what he says that China is afflicted with poverty the world doesn't understand. I said, I understand it because I've been on these trains and I've seen these cities. He's like, no, you don't understand. You're still a tourist and you still saw that part of China. There are tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people that live in such abject poverty in China that whole families of people will live in one house and they have one. He told me this in his Chinese accent. Whole families of people will have one set of clothes. And so researchers will come to interview them, and one member of the family will put on the pair of clothes, come out and do the interview, and then go back into the house, take off the clothes, give it to another family member, and that family member will put on that pair of clothes. That's incomprehensible. And so I don't think we have a good understanding of what's actually going on in China. And I think the only way any other country or countries in the world can defeat America is because America is being destroyed from within. And I think we're being destroyed morally from within with this curse of shame. And so this is the power of Christ to liberate us from shame, that we don't have to suffer that from that anymore.
What do you think?
That requires...
Yeah, what do you think brought that on? You see this, obviously this is a major point of the woke community. You saw this with Robin DiAngelo's white fragility, and this is like, you've got to feel guilty, feel bad just for being white, just for being whatever demographic, just for being American. Where do you think that culture of shame comes from?
I think the culture of shame comes from original sin, that we all, as human beings, we all carry original sin from Adam in the garden, and that those of us who are saved in Christ have actual medicine against original sin. That is our redemption. But those who are not saved in Christ, who don't believe in God, who don't believe in Christ's work on the cross, they carry this feeling of guilt and shame within themselves that they can't identify. And the Marxist project was to poke right at that thing called original sin, not call it original sin, but identify it with racial sin, slavery, or also there are so many different aspects. Environmental sin, you breathe carbon, right? Feminism, you oppress women if you're a man. Endless ways of poking at this sin. So people like, you're right, I have felt like crap my entire life and I don't know why. But Greta just told me that it's because I exhale carbon dioxide and I eat meat. So that must be it. I'm sorry. And it brings people down to their knees.
Yeah.
But then that's why the woke movement within Christianity is so hard to look at, because these are people that should be free from shame and guilt, but they're clearly still crippled by it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. It's a good point.
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's good. Just mind is thinking. Yeah, it really all stems from. It makes sense. It stems from this like cultural Marxism, and that all of these movements that we've seen are really it's that distilled down to something else. Like that's what feminism is. It's just whatever the thing is of the day that makes people feel bad is just. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the root of Marxism there. That's good. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so,
and
it's interesting the way it's played out here. Sorry, the way it's played out here.
Go ahead.
That I know it's played out in other countries as well, but it is interesting, and I mean I'm verbally processing here as I'm thinking through this, that it has specifically manifested itself in this culture of shame in America, where it hasn't, like, while those same movements have penetrated other countries, other Western worlds, first world countries, it doesn't seem to be creating the same issues that it's creating in America, right? Like, there's some of that in Western Europe and whatnot, but it is really interesting that you don't see, like, so many people, so many Americans hate America. Like, they just want to talk. They talk about how terrible of a country we are, how embarrassed they are. It's that. I don't hear that. Maybe it's there. Maybe I'm just not hearing it. But like, I don't hear people say that from England or Germany or Spain or Sweden, or I don't hear people be like, I'm just so embarrassed that I'm Swedish. I'm so embarrassed about this country. Like, I don't hear that, but so it's weird the way it's manifested itself here.
It's very, it's like Yuri Bezmenov, demoralization, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to conquer the world, with you have to demoralize the men, and the first men that you have to demoralize are the ones who are trying to bring moralization to the world, right? And so the thing is, I think World War II in the post-war period demoralized all the different nations of Europe, so that during our entire lifetime, I think all of these different nations have lost their identity. Now, I've talked about this often lately. How many millions of men, strong, noble, courageous, values-based men, moral men, were just destroyed in 2 world wars?
Yep.
Just gone. just blown to bits, came back shell shocked, right? And that affected Europe way more than it affected America.
Oh, for sure.
So you had this post-war period that America was riding high kings of the world through the 50s and 60s. But at the same time, you had the Frankfurt School. You had the cultural Marxists fleeing Germany, coming to the United States. This is documented, thinking, how can we destroy this country from within? Let's demoralize the men. And you have Kinsey in the 1950s, and then you have the 1960s when that took place. And so to lend some context, the Renaissance of Men as a concept is a 40-year process to rebirth masculinity out of this attempt to destroy it. So the Renaissance of Men, this conversation that you and I are having right now, we're riding the leading edge of a 40-year rebirth process to remoralize men. And I think it ultimately culminates in Christ, as all things do.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's good. That's great. Love it. I don't get to think through verbally process very often in the middle of a podcast, but thanks for letting me do that. So
you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I think, and I really do think this is why I think barbell training is so important, specifically barbell training.
Sure.
Because if you as a man lack belief in your essential goodness, outside of redemption in Christ, if you wonder about your own capacity, if you go and you try to lift a heavy thing and then you can't lift it, but then you work up to the point where you can actually lift that heavy thing, you can move material reality.
Yep.
And you discover the benefits of that, you can remoralize yourself very powerfully.
Sure. Well, and it's on the opposite side, right? Is it when you can't lift something, it's about the most demoralizing thing that can occur. Remember, it's interesting when I first got in strongman, and they do the stones, the Atlas stones, and it's so simple because it's just a rock, and it's so hard. It's so hard to pick up an Atlas stone. And so I can remember, like, by the time I was a pro, that we're loading 400-pound Atlas stones. But when I first did it, and I was pretty strong. I mean, I was an elite level power lifter when I first started doing strongman, and I can remember a 230-pound stone about killed me, and it turned your forearms into like hamburger meat. It was just bloody and disgusting. And I had gone up to Kansas City there was a professional strongman up there, and it was cold, and we did it in this barn. It was cold in the wintertime. And then I loaded all these stones, and I got back in my truck and drove back to Springfield 3 hours away. And when I got here, my back was so stiff, I could barely get out of the truck. I mean, it was so hard. And you're like, how could it be this hard? Just like picking a rock up off the ground and putting it up on a platform. But you're right. What's amazing is that you can train in a smart, progressive way. Progressive, I mean that in the right way. That's in the positive way. Titrating the weight up a little bit at a time, and before you know it, you can lift the stone, or you can lift the weight. And again, I said the stuff I did about my wife, not to make anybody feel bad, but the reality is like she didn't really know what strong was. I just we were working out together, and I was like, let's put 5 more pounds on the bar, and she would do that for a deadlift, and I remember the first time she deadlifted 225. And I was like, that's great, and then she came back a couple days later. I was like, let's put 5 more pounds on the bar. And she did 230, and I just did that for like 4 years. And then one day she deadlifted 400 pounds. So, it's just like, that's the thing. It's just not that, it's not, I guess what's crazy about barbell training is that it's not the exception to the rule, right? It's the norm. If you just give it consistency and technique, and by the way, I mean, like we are form Nazis on the way we do this. Like that's what people pay us for, is to make sure that we talked about Nazis twice. Form
reformers.
There we go. Okay. Yes. Form reformers. I like it. Yeah. I mean, we form is really important, but consistency is important. It comes back to that, anybody can train on the days that you feel great, and you don't want people that train on the days they don't feel good. Those are the ones that really make the progress. And so, we have those days, we call them the blue collar days. I mean, you're going in and you're punching your time card, you're getting in, getting out, but like, that's the day that makes you better. And so, anybody can get strong. I've got a lady I coached this morning. She's 87. Have I told you about this lady? Miss Sybil. So I've been coaching Sybil for like 8 or 9 years.
Wait, is it 87?
Yeah, 87. Dude, she deadlifts 150 for sets of 5. 87. Now listen to this. She has a
87-year-old woman.
Yeah, 87-year-old woman. So church organist for 40 years. And her son, who's like in his 60s, in great shape. Back when I owned the gym, my first big business, I owned a big strength gym and sold it at the end of 2015, started doing it online. When he would visit her for the holidays, he would come in and see me for a session or whatever. You know, he was like in his mid 50s at the time. Great shape, strong, lived out in Colorado. And he's like, boy, I sure do wish I could get you to coach my mom. I said, I'll coach your mom. And he's like, my mom's never been to a gym. I don't know if she'll come to a gym. And I was like, okay, you know, and talked about it a few times. And then one time he said, hey, do you think could you come out to my house or to my mom's house and meet my mom? And I was like, sure, I'll come out. And so it was awesome. She made a homemade biscotti and she made us coffee with like dip biscotti. And I taught her, and she was like 79 or 80. Yeah, at the time. Yeah. And I taught her how to stand up out of her dining room chair that day. I was like, all right, Miss Sybil, I'm going to teach you how to stand up out of your dining room chair. That's a squat. I taught her how to squat by standing up out of her dining room chair because she couldn't hardly sit on the toilet and get up. She was having a hard time getting in and out of her car. Her brain was like super sharp. She could tell amazing stories, great storyteller, very social, but her body was falling apart. And all her kids, she was a widow. Her husband had died like 10 years before, and none of her kids lived here. And so anyway, so she said, would you come out here and train me at my house? And I was like, yeah, I'll train you, you know, I'll come out. And so I started coming out and train. I trained her 3-4 times at the house. And then she said, I think I'd like to see your gym. And then she came to the gym and she started training at the gym. And I trained her for 8 years. And she squats. She has, listen, double hip replacement, knee replacement. Most of her back is fused together. She's had 2 inches cut off of one of her Achilles tendons. And that was all before I met her, right? Obviously, it would be bad if all that stuff happened after I met her. And so, you know, and she squats and she deadlifts and she bench presses and she presses and she does lat pull downs and she pushes the prowler, and she's 87 years old. And, you know, and it's not, you know, she can't squat with a bar on her back anymore. She holds a 40-pound medicine ball and squats, but like she's 87. Still. And she, you know, and she's deadlifting 150 pounds. And so anybody can do this. That's the point. The point is like she says every day, she's like, I don't know what I'd do without you. I'd be a decrepit old woman if it weren't for you. And so, and I always joke with her. I'm like, I am awesome. I do appreciate, I appreciate that you understand how, you know, so she comes to Thanksgiving. She's like my grandma. I invited her to church. She came over we had convivial Friday night, a big church event, and brought her out. You know, she's like a member of the family. But the reality is like, even for her, I'm like, Sybil, you know, you're not the exception to the rule. You're the norm. If 87-year-old people would do this, they would also get strong. They all get strong. And so people want to come up with these excuses. It's the snowflake problem. Like, I can't get strong because I got a bad back or I got a bad knee. Listen, all you guys listening to this podcast, you all have bad backs and bad knees. Who cares? Like, you got to learn. What are you going to not get strong? Guess what happens to your back when you get it strong? It becomes less vulnerable to injury. It becomes more resilient. Guess what happens with your bad knee when you make your quads strong? They support the knee. That's what they do. And so everybody wants to come up with these excuses on why they can't do the thing. Like, look, I get it. Everybody's broken somewhere. Like, we're bipeds. We walk around on 2 legs, and our backs, our discs, over time, they basically disintegrate on some level. And so they'll say you got degeneration on these discs. Well, yep, everybody does. That doesn't mean we don't lift. We still choose hard things. And so that's what we do. So Sybil is the norm, the 87-year-old lady. My wife is the norm, not the exception to the rule. It's just what happens when you train consistently is everybody gets strong. And so if you'll choose, your listeners will choose right now today to just start getting strong. And here's the promo, the marketing that I'll give. I tend to try to not send somebody to hire us on day one, because again, I know it's a fantastic service. If you decide to sign up for Barbell Logic, we got the best coaches in the world. We'll pair you with the best coach on earth for you specifically, and your first month's 100% free. But here's what I tell people instead: just go to our YouTube channel or our podcast and just start watching content. The videos are free. It'll always be free. You can learn, I don't know how to squat. Search how to squat Barbell Logic on YouTube. And we got great how to squat videos, how to deadlift. You can do the same thing. So that's usually where I send people first, because I know it takes some time to build some trust, to learn that we're the experts in the field and do the thing. But that's what I want out of people. And to me, when I come on a show like yours, this is, again, the way I get to build into Christendom. It would be great if people want to hire us. That's great. But that's not the goal. The goal is to get as many of the guys listening to this podcast in your audience training. And that means watching videos. Listen, we're doing great. We do great as a business. And so like what I really want people to do is like listen, watch the videos, listen to our podcast. We do 200,000 downloads a month on the podcast. I've told everything I ever know on on strength training on the Barbell Logic podcast. There's everything. I mean, I've literally, like when you're the subject matter expert, eventually we've done 600 podcasts. I've told everything I know. Videos, same thing. So go there first. The content's for free. Learn how to do this thing and just start. Like, just be people of action today. Don't just talk about strength training. Like, we've got to actually do the thing. Get under the bar, put a bar on your back, do the best you can, squat, video yourself, watch your video, see what it looks like compared to the video that we did on YouTube and go, oh, that's not very good yet. I'm going to clean that up. And like, that's what you do. And that's how you get strong. And then you'll find out that when you perform better and you're healthier, you feel better about yourself. Amazingly, you end up being better at your job, better as a husband, better as a father, better as a church leader, better as a business leader. Like, all those things start to fall into place. Not because strength training is the best thing, because it's not, but it supports all of those. And that's why we do it.
That's fantastic. I find myself, if you're listening and you can't deadlift as much as an 87-year-old woman and you're a man, you should probably work on that. No, it makes me think of my friend Glenn. Glenn is about to turn 70, and he came out. I hosted a men's retreat here in Phoenix 2-3 weeks ago, and he came out and he served as an elder role for the men who were there. And Glenn, sometime in the past 4 or 5 years, lost like 80 or 90 pounds. Right. He was having health problems, lost 80 or 90 pounds. Now he is literally one of the most fit dudes I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, he comes into the gym, he wears sleeveless shirts, and the dude his arms are just incredible. And the dude's 70 years old. Yeah. Like, I brought him in, and all the guys in the gym, I didn't introduce him to the guys in the gym. They're like, who's that guy over there? We've never seen him before. Right. And he's just doing these curls. Like, man, I want this 70-year-old man's arms. That's right. And it's like, and he's not the exception to the rule. He's not some genetic freak. Nope. Like, this is what's available to all of us. Yep. If we just stick with it. And I wonder if you can just speak for a moment about the necessity of time, because that was one of the things that I really liked in your heart. I started out the conversation talking about the Hard Man podcast that you were on with Eric Kahn. And so now I want to come all the way back around to it. Sure. Is one of the things that you made really clear was that to make meaningful strength and fitness goals takes time. Sure. Right. Like, I love the breakdown. Like, you can't build muscle and lose fat at the same time. That's right. They gave the clearest explanation of that. And to really build up, 300 plus pounds on the bar for squatting, 400 plus pounds, like, it takes years. There's no 90-day, quick program that you're going to do. I wonder if you can, you can just rant about that for a minute, because I love your fitness industry rants as well.
Yeah, right. Well, first, I hate the fitness industry. I hate it. And just as much as I hate bodybuilding, I hate the fitness industry. You're like, how does that work? You're a CEO of this fitness company. It's, again, for your listeners, that many of whom are going to be post-mill and have that sort of the long view, that's the same view we take in the fitness stuff, right? It's not.
They better be post-mill.
Say they better be post-mill.
they better be.
So you've convinced them at this point. Yeah. I mean, like,
yes, I hope
so. And so we should be able to take the long view on this thing. And so, again, it's perfectly fine to have goals. I like to have goals. Like, as a matter of fact, we just booked a trip down to Mexico in June. So I'm like, all right, I've got a goal to, like, I want to look as good as I can and perform as well as I can for Mexico. And that's this little, like, short-term goal. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this for the long-term health benefits, for what it gets me. Again, it's not about accomplishing the goal. It's what the work itself gets me. There was something extremely valuable in the squat and deadlift workout I did yesterday at the cabin all by myself, where there's no cameras and there's nobody to see. There's nobody to tell me how great I was. Like, there's value in that, in the work, in the actual work. And so that's when we take that long view, then we realize, like, okay, I'm not trying to get, it's not 7-minute abs or 90 days to, like, a beach body or, like, whatever that thing is. It's like, it's the work itself. So what's great about that is, like, you can reap the benefits of the work itself today, like tonight, like, go to the gym right now, because it's not actually about, like, how much better you look after the workout. It's the work itself, right? And then there is this incredible thing that occurs, a stress recovery adaptation cycle that this guy Hans Selye, this German, figured out back in the 20s. He's just like, you stress your body in a way it hasn't been stressed before. It recovers and it adapts to that stress, and actually adapts to what could be even a bigger stress than that for next time, which is why when we take the long view, we go in, it doesn't matter where you start squatting. When somebody hires me as a coach, I'm like, look, I don't care if you start with the empty bar, 45 pounds. It doesn't matter to me where you start. That doesn't, there are times, it's like when people try to clean themselves up to go to church. Like, I need to clean my life up before I go. And you're like, no. And it's the same thing when you start training. Like, it doesn't matter where you start. Start with the empty bar, start with 60 pounds, doesn't matter. And then what we can do is we can literally just go in and add 5 pounds to the bar every workout. And so the crazy thing about that is if you add 5 pounds every workout, and for most of our clients, they squat 3 times a week. So they're not squatting once a week. They're squatting 3 times a week. That's 60 pounds a month they add. 60 pounds on their squat. So if you start at 60, at the end of the month, you're doing 120. And at the end of the next month, you're doing 180. And then, so like pretty quick, you're like, oh, I'm pretty strong. Like, yeah, you added 5 pounds per workout 3 times a week. You added 60 pounds per month. That's what you're doing. So we do that on deadlift. We alternate the bench press and the press. We focus on the 4 big lifts and do chin ups and a few other things, but not very much. Our exercise pool is pretty small. It's maybe relatively boring training, but when you understand what you're doing, like if I can come in and do the main lifts and add 5 pounds every workout for 4 months, why would I do anything else? And that's another problem that people get. They get bored and they want to, muscle confusion and what? Just do your job, put your head down and go into the gym and add 5 more pounds to the squat bar than you did last time and squat it. And no matter how much you want to quit, don't quit, just finish and then rack it and then move on to the next exercise. That's what we do. And what you'll find is that while there's tons of value in the work itself, you will actually lose track of time a little bit. And all of a sudden, like 3 months in, 4 months in, you'll glance at yourself in the mirror and you'll be like, who's that guy? Because you're a bigger, stronger version of yourself than what you were when you started. As a matter of fact, literally every workout you are, every time you go into the gym, you're a bigger, stronger version of yourself than you were on Friday. And that's pretty satisfying. And so the key, again, comes back to perfect technique, which you can learn from a lot of our videos, and consistency. Doing it when you don't want to. Understanding that, like, blue collar days, the punch the time card, get in, get out. There are days that it's going to be awesome. Enjoy those days. The days that suck, the days that you're tired, the days that you want to get it over with, just get in and get it done and get out. And that's how you make progress, because consistency and longevity, that's what leads. Like, this is, I was talking about our podcast doing well. Man, we've recorded every week since 2017. So that's what people can't do. Videos are the same thing. I don't know how many hundreds of YouTube videos we have. Hundreds. All professionally produced, nothing on a cell phone. Like, it's the long game. You're just playing the long game. You just outlast people. And it was the same thing here with us with the business. I mean, the business did pretty well from the beginning, but over time, like, we continue to work and get better and work and get better. And pretty soon you're like, oh, wow, we're like one of the biggest online coaching businesses in the world. I was like, well, we've been going since 2016. Every day, all the time, 24-hour feedback, no matter what. Like, we have a statistician that works for us, and he was telling us how many millions of squat videos we've broken down. It's millions of squat videos we've broken down. And so that's what it is. It's the longevity. I never get sick of it. I love it. I love helping people. I love coaching. But that's understanding the same way you look at eschatology with the long game. You have to look at your fitness life the same way. I'm playing the long game. Like, I'm doing this because of what the work provides for me, the voluntary hardship. And, oh, by the way, I get to look better and feel better in the process. Yeah, that's awesome. Those are fringe benefits. So
I think you also touch on a little bit of the father hunger, because one of the things I know about what you guys do at Barbell Logic is, you actually have a coach engaging with the individual, checking their form, being there, present with them. Because that's the thing that I ran into. It's like, because I tried the online programs, the PDFs, and I was like, I have a question. I'm 3-4 weeks in and I'm freaking out. I don't know if I'm plateauing or going the wrong direction. I ask the PDF a question and the PDF doesn't say anything.
That's right.
Right. So to find an actual person, it's like, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing. Help, and
Yep.
that they can offer reassurance or correction where necessary. I think that that's super important.
Oh, it's
it gets
for
overlooked.
sure. It's the separator for us with all the, online coaching. That term online coaching for most people means buying an online program, but that's not online coaching, right? Like, I wouldn't say I'm your football coach if I sent you a football program and you read the program. Like, what makes you a football coach? Well, it's actually coaching the technique. I actually have to teach you how to get in a 3-point stance and fire off and hit, whatever the thing is. Strength coaching is the same way. Like, if without technique coaching, you're not actually coaching. You're just selling somebody a program. It should be called online programming. Now, the world's not going to listen to me about how they call online coaching the wrong thing, but like that's the thing. So for us, one, we have our own software. Everybody gets personalized programming. We don't use templates or cookie cutter anything.
Mm-hmm.
Your program is all for you. But the real separator is you get paired with a coach that's specific to your needs and like your demographics. So, we've got people that are, I don't know, postpartum moms or whatever. I've got female coaches that do that, whatever it is. And so you video your lifts every single workout and upload them on our app. And then your coach fully breaks that down in a screen recording within 24 hours of you doing your workout. So by the time you get to your next workout, you have the feedback from the coach. Well, nobody else does that. And that's all built into our software, screen recording software, all this stuff. So you see yourself squatting, but you hear my voice as a voiceover, and it's, I can record it right here on the podcast microphone and stuff. It works great. So it's pretty nice. And it definitely leads to building a relationship with your clients. So like you said, that kind of scratches some of that father itch or some of that, like, having somebody who's an authority on some level. Like even the clients say all the time when they have to turn the camera on. So let's say they're going to film their last set of squats. They're going to do squats 225 for 3 sets of 5. Well, the first couple sets, like, maybe they sandbag it a little bit, but they turn on the video for the third set and they start recording themselves. They're like, I got to do this perfect because coach is watching. So it raises the standard, it raises the bar. And so that's why I think people do so well. And then the crazy thing is, and we're super dedicated to great customer service and whatnot, but like, man, our client retention rate is 97.5% per month, 2.5% churn. That's unheard of in the fitness industry. That's unheard of in almost any industry, but in the fitness industry, it's unheard of. And it's one of the reasons the business continues to value higher and higher is because our customer service is so great. We don't lose anybody. And so again, I'm starting to sound like a commercial now, but our sales pitch is that when somebody signs up for Barbell Logic, their first month's 100% free. There's no contract. There's no like, what's the catch? There's no catch. Your first month's 100% free. We pair you with the right coach. If you'll try it for a month, you will stay for the rest of your life. That's my customer acquisition cost. I still pay your coach full pay, like whoever your coach is gets full pay. So that's my cost as a company. But I'd rather give it to you in your first month free than give it to Zuckerberg on Facebook. And so that's where we decided to spend our marketing money. So the first month's 100% free. You don't have to stay, but everybody stays. And so that's the pitch. I mean, that's why it works. So yeah, it's worked great. Love it. Have a great team. Have a great business. I mean, people that surround me are incredible. Our coaches are nuts, man. They're fantastic. So couldn't ask for a better team to work with. And I still get to coach some, and I'm coaching Eric Kahn and some of those guys. And I have a blast coaching, but I love being a CEO at this point. And really my life I'm mostly a CEO, and that's, so I get up every morning and I knock out the super early. I get up at 4:30. I don't set an alarm. I always wake up early and I knock out the urgent stuff, the online coaching stuff. And then I get to spend the rest of my day being a CEO. And by 3:00 or so in the afternoon, I shut it down and I get to be husband and dad, which is a pretty sweet life.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I really recommend everyone listening, if you're looking for a strength training fitness program, to go to Barbell Logic. And the only reason that I don't train with you guys is that I train with my buddy Sean, who I go to church with every week.
Yeah, you were telling me that. Well, that's great.
Yeah. And so like, if I didn't have Sean, and we have a great time, we train and chat and really pour into each other's lives, like I would be training with you if
for sure,
if that were the case. So, and I know that you trained Tanner Guzzi and a bunch of other guys, which is how I heard about you, was through Tanner singing your praises. Shout out Tanner.
Yeah. Tanner's great. And Tanner's fixed my style. So
Same. Wearing Tanner recommended what I'm wearing now.
That's right.
Yeah.
The white shoes and the shorty shorts and the polos. So we're good.
I'm not there
Actually,
yet.
a bunch of my coaches have utilized Tanner since too, and it's always interesting. It's like when you see them, or even our clients. I have clients at Barbell Logic. We'll go to like a powerlifting meet or a seminar or something, and I can tell if they've hired Tanner as a coach because I can tell that I'm like, oh, like he looks, the way he's dressing is fantastic. So, and that's a big part of it too. Again, I think sometimes we can take the aesthetic side of this, and we sort of, as Christians, can kind of, poop on it a little bit. And you're like, it's just aesthetics. It doesn't matter. But like your appearance matters, and what you're trying to convey, like as somebody who's trying to convey some amount of, dominance or whatever that is, right? So authority in what I'm trying to say, like the way you dress matters. Like if I'm in sloppy clothes, a big ratty t-shirt, cargo shorts, it's not conveying what I want to convey. And so, and that's actually was tough for me when I first hired Tanner, because I'm a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, but it's a fitness company. And so I don't dress like, I'm not wearing suits. So how do I dress so that it's like, okay, this guy's professional, and he looks, I mean, you can even see like in the background in my office and stuff like it. I think about those things. There's not dirty laundry on the floor, which I'm amazed at how often I do a Zoom call and somebody's got dirty laundry in the background. I'm like, what's going
insane.
on? It's crazy. There's toys everywhere or something. So yeah, I think about that kind of stuff. And so that stuff matters. And certainly the Tanner will tell you the very best thing you can ever do for your style is get in shape. You lose the spare tire, lose the 20-pound gut, and it's amazing how much better clothes will fit. And so it all helps tremendously well. And those are nice having that synergistic industries to work with for sure. We got a bunch of good buddies and friends like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's something. I think everything that we've talked about today is so important for Christian men to begin thinking about. Supporting your brothers, getting in shape, upgrading your style, really, and recognizing that it's all for the purpose of building into Christendom.
That's right.
Like all these things, they fit together. They're not separate pieces of different things.
Nope.
They're all the same pieces of the same thing. And this is what I'm trying to really impress upon men with the whole notion of the Renaissance, is that there is a rebirth happening, and it's not any one aspect of this. It's not just the materialism, or it's not the Gnosticism. It's everything. We have to somehow be in the world, not of the world, aware of the spiritual, but not floating up in the air. And it's such an enormous ask for men, but I think it's an obligation for Christian men, and I think that's reflected in the Bible.
Yep.
I think it's very scriptural to see the way that the men in the New Testament acted, in the Old Testament for that matter. But it's the benefits in this life are immeasurable. And if you have salvation carrying you into the next, why would you not want to have both those things together?
That's good. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Matt. I've really appreciated this conversation and all of your wealth of insight and your passion for these topics.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks for having me on the show. I've been a fan. Excited to get to know you more. And no, thank you so much for letting me tell my story on the show.
You're welcome. Welcome. I got to get myself out to Springfield for sure.
Yeah, for sure. We've got good coffee and good squatting. So we need to get ourselves out to Phoenix. Actually, I love your church too. So I would love to hear at some point how you found Apologia out in the middle of nowhere. So did you pick up that it was just this like great church? You're like, did you have a contact? How did you originally find your church?
Oh, I discovered them through their podcast. Okay. I don't remember how. Maybe Instagram suggested something, and I remember seeing that they were going to do an anti-abortion protest at the state capitol, and I was like, "Oh, any church that's doing an anti-abortion protest at the state capitol is probably a church that I want to go to."
That's awesome.
And so I went looking for information about where the church met, and I wasn't able to find anything at the time. This was in 2020, 2021, something like that. And then I spoke at the 21 convention, speaking of the Manosphere in 2021, and Michael Foster was there.
Oh yeah,
and
that's
I was
right.
Like, oh yeah, there's this Apologia church. Yeah. There's this Apologia church in Phoenix. But I don't know if they're meeting. And he's like, oh, I think Jeff is probably still going. So he pointed me and my buddy Sean in the right direction. Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
So
that's great, dude. How funny that you fell into those guys. Like, and now, I mean, you've been in it long enough to know, like, you realize it's like one of the best churches in the United States. Like you just got lucky. You got lucky. So no, it's great. That's what we love about churches like you guys, and again, like what's going on in Moscow or in Ogden or here, that you're building these little pockets of Christendom where you are, and it's pretty cool. So it's been awesome that I get to help with that some and make men stronger for sure, and wives.
Absolutely,
we make them stronger too. It's okay. Nothing wrong with that either. So.
Does your wife ever do podcasts? Because I feel like there's got to be something for wives.
She's done mine. She's done mine a few times. Yeah. So I mean, again, I always have co-hosts and stuff, but we had my original co-host. We had both our wives on. We've had them on like 3 times, and they're super popular episodes. They're hilarious, and we had a few drinks beforehand to loosen them up, and then they end up. It was a lot of fun. So she's funny. She's my wife is awesome, and she's extremely wise, but she's, it's funny. She balances me out, and they're like, I'm the guy that's always like in the limelight, and I'm the CEO, and then she wants to be kind of behind the scenes, and she's much more quiet, and doesn't necessarily want to be the public speaker. But it's funny when she says stuff like, in Sunday school or something, she'll say something, and I'm just like, whoa, that was like super deep and super wise, and she's just sitting there chewing on stuff, and then she'll say something, and I'm like, wow, it's great because we have a fantastic relationship. We get to bounce things off each other, and she knows I'm the one that's going to verbally process, and she's the one that's going to sit there and sort of silence and chew through stuff. And then she says something, and I'm like, okay, that's super wise. And I met her in 8th grade. Yeah, she's my high school sweetheart. Met in youth group at church, and just the way it's supposed to be, man. I just wish I'd had a few more kids. Nobody told us. We didn't understand that rule, so we had 2 kids, and wish I had about 6 of them. But yeah, we didn't really understand a lot of that kind of stuff has changed over the years for us. So it's okay. I've told my kids I gotta give me a million grandbabies, and they'll pick up where I left off. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple minutes left before I gotta go. But does your wife advocate for barbell strength training for women? Like, is that a subject that comes up? Because
Yeah, for sure. And then actually, like, again, a lot of our coaches, I've got some fantastic female coaches. We try to set people up. We don't say this overtly, but we tend to. Men typically get male coaches, and women typically get female coaches. Occasionally, we'll have a coach that coaches a husband and wife team. So maybe it's a female coach, a husband and wife, or a male, whatever. But our female coaches they're great, and they're strong, and they look the part. They don't look like they're not masculine. They're extremely effeminate. They're feminine, extremely feminine, and they look the part. They look healthy. They're super. They have a level of confidence that doesn't get into arrogance, right? So there's that kind of false sense of confidence that you see people have sometimes. It's not that at all. They're wives and moms, and they're strength coaches. They're like 45-year-old soccer mom ladies, a lot like my wife. My wife's a really good coach too. She doesn't work for us or anything. Doesn't want to. She wouldn't want to work for me probably, but they're great at what they do. And so, yeah, so my wife's done a great job of just advocating that, but also just the other female coaches that work for us are fantastic. And so, and it's interesting that my business isn't overtly a Christian business. It's a fitness business. And so we've got all sorts of coaches and stuff, but it's interesting the way as time has gone on, how the majority of my employees have sort of adopted a very similar worldview as what I have. And, obviously everybody's super aware of how I live my life and what I believe. And, I try not to jam anything down anybody's throat, but it's interesting how I think there's something in strength training as well. You have to take personal responsibility for, like, again, nobody's going to make you squat. So there's not a lot of victims in strength training. I don't know if you've seen, I've seen articles, you've probably seen these before, about how guys that lift weights tend to be more on the right politically. Have you seen these articles?
Yeah.
Well, like, of course they are, because people that are on the left are victims, and victims don't squat. Victims complain about squatting or whatever. So it's interesting how,
it's so heavy,
right? Isn't it crazy? So it's interesting. It's like, oh, if I'm going to take personal responsibility and put a heavy barbell on my back, then that works itself out in other places in your life. And so I see, it's funny, like, we try to be very careful to be generally apolitical and areligious in the business, because I'm just trying to get everybody strong. Like, legitimately, I'm just trying to help people get strong. And I think for some people that is often the step that they need to take to improving their life in what may be like a long-term actual spiritual change in their life. Again, I don't think squatting gets anybody saved, but I think it's important. But it is interesting over time how people are like, oh, it's interesting. It's just like I've just noticed. I haven't said it out loud, but I've just noticed more and more people like, yeah, these strength coaches, these people that squat, they all kind of, they've all got a gaggle of kids. They all have 7 kids, and like all my strength coaching mamas that work for me all have 6 kids and live in Montana. And they're, I'm like, interesting. I didn't. So yeah, it's really wild. But I guess we've set our culture correctly. So maybe that's what it is. We've got good core values, I guess. So.
Do you find that the people who work for you in the company who aren't Christian, have they come around? I don't know how much you can talk about that. But is that something that you experience happening in and around your company? Let's say.
Yeah, I've had really good conversations with people in my company for sure. When we travel and go to seminars, we always try to get a big Airbnb or something instead of doing separate hotel rooms. And so we get to have a lot of time to work together and talk, and, they've seen my life, and they also know my past as well. And so I haven't, hidden that stuff either. So they know that I've gone through a major change. And so, yeah, we've had great conversation. I've got a good group of Christians that work for me. And then another group that I don't think anybody is hostile towards the gospel, which is interesting because Romans tells us that they are. So, but I think I've been able to create a culture that it's safe to talk about that kind of stuff, and they know that I'm not going to judge them. Again, I'm playing the long game, right? So it's not my job to evangelize; it's my job to disciple, and so to teach the gospel, and I let God do what God does. And so because of that, they don't have to worry about. I'm not a used car salesman with the gospel with my employees,
right?
And so, I think that culture is shown through pretty intently at Barbell Logic for sure. And then, it's been nice. They've allowed me to do stuff like, like your podcast is a controversial podcast. We got into Eric Kahn's same sort of thing. And so,
is it?
Well, you know what I mean?
Is it a podcast?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, okay.
It is. If you run a multi-million-dollar company like mine, then it's like, but it's good because, while Barbell Logic has been able to stay relatively apolitical and irreligious, like they've let me go on these podcasts to do these things, to be able to talk about this stuff. And so, that's what I mean. So, we obviously Barbell Logic is not going to take a super hard stand on anything political or whatnot. I mean, it's a corporation, so it doesn't have morality because but I'm very grateful that my company and my employees and my investors and my shareholders let me go on podcasts and talk about whatever I want to talk about on a personal level, which is pretty nice. So I've got to do that and scratch that itch.
Yeah, they let you be yourself.
Yep.
And they don't make you censor yourself for the benefit of the company, because all these things are you, and
that's right.
Your theology feeds into your business, and your eschatology feeds into it as well, and you can't separate these things.
Nope, that's exactly right. Yeah. So it's been great.
Excellent. So where would you like to send men and women to find out about you and Barbell Logic, and where can they get started?
So Barbell Logic is super easy to find anywhere. Obviously, you can just Google Barbell Logic. It comes up. Website's barbelllogic.com. We're on all the social medias. I'm Reynolds at Reynolds Strong on Instagram and Twitter, where if you want to follow me personally, which is a lot more like reformed posting, so fitness and reformed, mostly reformed stuff. Barbell Logic is a great place to go. You can check out the online coaching there, but again, one of the best places to go is to check out our content. So YouTube, if you go to YouTube and just search Barbell Logic, you'll see all kinds of great videos there, as well as the Barbell Logic podcast. And again, I think there's 500 or 600 episodes there. That podcast is in a very systematic, logical progression of strength training. So you can go back to the very beginning and just listen to the most basics of strength training, and then it walks through more and more advanced sort of stuff as we go along the line. And so there's an entire series on programming or technique or whatever that you can find on the podcast as well. Again, I always try to send people there because all that content's free, will always be free. We're a service business. We make money from service. So that means I don't have to make money from content, which means the content's never going to be behind a paywall. I don't think there's anything wrong with putting content behind a paywall. But for us, that's the way we get people into the funnel. So that's where I would say, hey, just consume the content. You can literally Google any question you have in the fitness world and ask any question and type the words Barbell Logic. And I promise you, we'll have a podcast or a video or an article about that. And so we try to answer every question you could ever come up with. I've got great articles too. I've got my editor-in-chief as an attorney, no longer practicing attorney, but works for us as an editor-in-chief. He's a phenomenal writer. So we've got written word, spoken word on the podcast, and videos as well on YouTube. So that's where I'd go first.
Fantastic. All right. I'll be sure to send everyone there because, fitness and Christendom those are hot topics right now. That is very much up, and having good resources to send men and women to, I think is crucial. So that's really valuable for me to know because I have my own questions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And let me know. And you guys can reach out anytime. I love getting questions as well. Like on Twitter, if you'll ask me a question on Twitter, I get guys from Eric Kahn's podcast ask me questions all the time. Again, at Reynolds Strong on Twitter. Happy to look at, obviously I don't want 10,000 of these, but like sometimes people take a video of their squat and they're like, hey, I'm happy to look at something like that from somebody in the community. So if you got any questions for me, feel free to reach out. I'll always respond on Twitter or Instagram or wherever. Easy to find. Also easy to find my email as well. You can just Google my name as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's been great.